Chapter 16:23. As soon as Luo Fan saw the scene in front of him, he knew that this area could no longer be regarded as a part of this world. And if this area was not regarded as a part of that unimaginably high-end world, then it could only be because of the influence of the chaotic state that came from the chaotic state of the entrance. However, at this time, Luo Fan did not have much time to waste on this. With a thought, the heaven-splitting axe was lifted up in an instant. With a slight shake, it directly chopped towards the broken emperor who appeared in front of Luo Fan. When the broken emperor saw the heaven-splitting axe coming, his face showed a dignified expression. With a thought, a strong spiritual light gushed out from his body, instantly condensing into a strange sphere in front of him. This sphere was extremely strange. It looked like a planet, but it also looked like a crystal ball. It also looked like a sun. After appearing in front of him, it began to rotate rapidly. The way it rotated seemed to contain some inconceivable principles, as if there were countless worlds and universes within it. After such a sphere appeared, the surrounding space within a range of billions of miles had undergone earth-shattering changes. The originally murky and chaotic scene split apart in the blink of an eye. Clear and turbid, the sun and the moon were formed. In the blink of an eye, there was an incomparably vast world. An infinitely vast world appeared in the surroundings, replacing the original gray. And at this moment, Luo Fan's heaven-splitting axe exuded a kind of power that could cut through everything. The moment it swept across, it directly split the world. A huge crack that seemed to have appeared in this world since its birth appeared. Such a crack directly started from the position of the heaven-splitting axe and went straight to the sphere that appeared in front of the broken emperor. A soft sound rang out. At this moment, a thin crack, or rather, a thin trace appeared on the sphere. When it appeared on the sphere, it looked as though an invisible brush had brushed across the sphere. At this time, the broken emperor showed a sneer. He didn't seem to do anything, but the sphere abruptly split apart. In the blink of an eye, it transformed into billions of tiny parts directly engraved in this world, transforming into the stars of this world. When this happened, the strength of the entire world suddenly increased by an unknown number of times. Originally, just the momentum of the heaven-splitting axe was enough to open such a huge crack in this world. But at this moment, after the strength of this world increased, not only was the heaven-splitting axe unable to open a crack in this world, it was also unable to do so. Moreover, even the huge crack that had just opened up in front of them was rapidly closing up at this moment. This appearance, it was as if this world had started to devour everything that didn't belong to this world after the appearance of this starry sky. At this moment, out of the countless trillions of stars, countless stars began to light up one by one in an instant. These stars were not to be recklessly used, but they were also very powerful. As each star lit up, it was as if the strength of this world had increased by another level. In this half a year, countless stars had lit up, and the strength of this world had risen to an indescribable level. In such a strong world, Luo Fan only had an inexplicable feeling, as if he had suddenly become an ordinary person. The suppression effect of the surrounding world on him had increased to the point that he couldn't even resist the gravity. At this time, his heaven-splitting axe seemed to have become an ordinary axe used to chop firewood. When he waved it, it couldn't even cut through the air. What a strong world! Luo Fan sighed with emotion in his heart at this moment. The strength of this world had already reached the limits of his imagination. Even the strength of Tianyuan Great World that he had seen before seemed to be far inferior to this world in front of him. Even a great world like Tianyuan Great World couldn't compare to it, let alone the Great Wilderness World or the Earth Universe. Compared to this world, the gap between them was even more unimaginable. In such an inconceivable world, the broken emperor was like a god of creation. He floated in the starry sky. Countless starlight shone. He was like the master of the entire starry sky. It was as if the entire starry sky was revolving around him. At this moment, the broken emperor looked at Luo Fan, gently raised his hand, and pinched at the place where Luo Fan was. In an instant, An invisible arm suddenly appeared around Luo Fan's body and began to pinch at Luo Fan's body. Facing such an invisible arm, Luo Fan had an inexplicable feeling. It was as if he wasn't facing an emperor, but a terrifying existence at the true divine level. This feeling of powerlessness, the strong premonition that all his resistance would be useless, made him suddenly have countless inexplicable thoughts. However, Luo Fan was, after all, Luo Fan. He wasn't the kind of person whose willpower couldn't be controlled. At this moment, under the urging of the strong willpower in his heart, this terrifying pressure was instantly broken, and his mind instantly returned to its original state. After returning to his normal state, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. He slightly turned the heaven-splitting axe in his hand, and in an instant, an axe light was directly waved by him. Luo Fan's attainments in martial arts had almost exhausted all the principles of the way of martial arts. With such attainments in martial arts, even if it was an ordinary axe, with the strength of an ordinary person, it was enough to easily kill an immortal. Moreover, the axe in his hand was not an ordinary one, but a spiritual light heaven-splitting axe constructed by the condensation of two kinds of spiritual lights. It was a powerful existence that could even split the state of chaos and could completely destroy everything in the world. Such an axe, even if it seemed to have become an ordinary axe at this time, as if it had become absolutely powerless against this world, it couldn't change its nature as a spiritual light heaven-splitting axe. When it was waved like this, however, its power had already increased by countless times. Under this axe, the world that was originally so strong that even his spiritual light heaven-splitting axe couldn't shake and couldn't be destroyed directly had billions of cracks appear. These cracks were deeply engraved in this world of spiritual light. They were directly produced from the time and space of this world. It was the countless stars that fixed this world and strengthened the strength of this world. At this time, there seemed to be corresponding changes, as if there were traces of cracks appearing on these stars. Martial arts were originally a means of exerting a certain amount of power that far exceeded the normal performance of a certain amount of power. Under such circumstances, the spiritual light heaven-splitting axe was activated by Luo Fan using martial arts. The power that the spiritual light heaven-splitting axe could exert was naturally many times stronger than before. It couldn't be more normal for it to be able to split the world. After all, although the world was so powerful and so incredible, in terms of its origin, it was only constructed by the spiritual light of the broken emperor. Such a world, no matter how it behaved, compared to Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven-splitting axe, it was bound to have its limitations. At most, it was bound to be similar to the spiritual light heaven-splitting axe. It had such an essence. Luo Fan could naturally think of some ways to let the spiritual light heaven-splitting axe get rid of the influence of this world. The large axe light that the spiritual light heaven-splitting axe released directly blasted towards the invisible hand that was squeezing down on Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, endless brilliance erupted from the point where the axe light and the invisible hand came into contact. Under that intense light, the entire world shook violently. In this shaking, the endless stars in the starry sky seemed to be constantly shaken by a big hand. Every star began to shake violently in an instant. If there were only one or two of these stars shaking, it naturally wouldn't be conspicuous. If one's perception wasn't sharp, it would be extremely easy to ignore it. But now, the number of stars swaying in this way was endless. Almost all the stars in the entire starry sky were shaking at the same time. This scene couldn't even be described with the word big. At this moment, the entire starry sky was like a dice thrown into a bowl, shaking crazily. The broken emperor shouted softly at this time, raised his hand and gently pointed at the starry sky. In an instant, the violently shaking starry sky slightly stabilized. In the blink of an eye, it was as if nothing had happened, completely stabilized. However, although the starry sky had stabilized, the invisible hand that was squeezing down on Luo Fan had completely collapsed at this time. Around Luo Fan's body, the countless axe lights had formed a vast and boundless world, directly blocking all the rules of this world, all the space-time, and all the power outside this world of axe lights. In this world of axe lights, all the suppression that the spiritual light heaven splitting axe received had completely disappeared. Above the spiritual light heaven splitting axe, it was still exuding a kind of earth-splitting charm. And Luo Fan, who was holding the spiritual light heaven splitting axe, looked more like Pangu, who was in a state of chaos, ready to split the heavens and the earth at any time. Facing all these changes, the broken emperor didn't show any expression of disbelief. At this moment, he did not hesitate to turn his hand in the void and then slapped towards Luo Fan. Following that, the endless stars trembled slightly and starlight condensed. In the blink of an eye, it had already formed a fist outside of Luo Fan's world of axe lights, directly blasting towards the world of axe lights. Facing such a bombardment, Luo Fan smiled faintly. The spiritual light heaven splitting axe in his hand shook slightly and instantly slashed towards the fist. This was an axe that could split the heavens and the earth. In this axe, one could even understand all the martial arts principles related to the axe. As the axe slashed out, the world of axe light began to churn violently. As it churned, it began to expand rapidly, directly blocking the starlight fist that was coming towards him. Asterisk kaboom! Asterisk an earth-shattering thunderclap sounded in an instant. The starlight fist collided with his world of axe lights. In an instant, the world of axe lights shattered, and a huge hole appeared, a hole that was big enough for the starlight fist to pass through. However, the starlight fist did not reach this step without any cost. In fact, in order to achieve this step, the starlight fist was already covered with countless cracks. These cracks appeared on the surface of the starlight fist and spread straight to the depths of the starlight fist. One could even faintly see the scene behind the starlight fist through these cracks. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven splitting axe finally came into contact with the fist. With a soft sound, the starlight fist did not have the slightest ability to resist. It had already been split open by the spiritual light heaven splitting axe from head to tail. Moreover, at the place where the starlight fist was split open. In other words, above the crack, there were countless worlds and worlds being born within it. These worlds, they were like grapes densely piled up in this crack. Faintly, one could even see countless creatures being born and growing at an unimaginable speed in these worlds, and finally reaching an incredible height. As the crack expanded, these worlds began to increase, constantly devouring the surrounding space-time, gradually turning the surrounding space-time into these worlds. Of course, compared to the speed of birth in the starlight fist before. After these worlds broke through the range of the starlight fist, the speed of their birth began to rapidly slow down. At this moment, the broken emperor finally frowned. He saw his hands tremble slightly at this moment. As his hands trembled, the endless stars in the starry sky began to move continuously. The distribution of these stars had actually already surpassed the level that could be described by arrays and could only be described by the Great Path. Right now, this kind of movement seemed to be directly manipulating the Great Tao, causing the mysteries contained in these stars to become completely different from before, even though it was not an increase. Although it was not an increase, it had an absolute counter to the countless growing and spreading worlds in front of him. All kinds of invisible laws were naturally born. It began to form more and more intense pressure on the countless worlds, causing the speed of their birth to gradually slow down. However, Luo Fan's reaction was also very powerful. At this moment, his spiritual light heaven splitting axe kept swinging, and axe lights that seemed to be able to split the heavens and earth were sent out by him, continuously striking the worlds outside the axe light world. He created one world group after another, constantly resisting the broken emperor's means, causing the expansion of the world group to barely maintain the same speed. The two's means were roughly equal. When the world group finally could not increase anymore, When the situation completely stabilized, the entire world group was almost evenly divided. One of them was the starry sky world in the hands of the Broken Emperor. The other was the countless worlds in the hands of Luo Fan. Among the countless worlds, Luo Fan stood in the middle. Around him, the Axelight world surged slightly, and an inexplicable connection connected the countless worlds in the world group. The power of each other was connected, causing the countless worlds in the world group to be completely connected at this time, forming an extremely complete and extremely tight whole. Although it was only a few dozen breaths, due to the different flow of time, at this time, every world in the world group had already grown to an incredible level. It was unknown how many false sages were born among them, constantly traveling between the countless worlds, causing those worlds to become more and more stable and powerful as time passed. This kind of stability and power was naturally not meaningless. In fact, this kind of stability and power was precisely the way to resist the powerful starry sky world that the Broken Emperor had built. Good means. I didn't expect my broken world to be blocked by Taoist friends' simple destructive means, the Broken Emperor said at this time. Hearing this, Luo Fan just smiled and said, Taoist friend, you have misunderstood. My heaven-splitting axe doesn't only have destructive power. The most powerful thing about the heaven-splitting axe is creation. Hearing this, the Broken Emperor smiled faintly and said, Creation? In that case, let me see how strong the creation ability of Taoist friends' means is. As they spoke, in the starry sky world, the stars began to leave their original positions, like meteors. One by one, they collided with the world group around Luo Fan. Boom, 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 boom. Every collision of a star would create countless terrifying vibrations out of thin air, even forming an unknown number of sound waves in the world group. As for the world group around Luo Fan, the moment every star collided with it, it was like a drop of boiling oil was dripped into a drop of water, causing violent riots. It was unknown how many worlds were directly destroyed in this process. All of them turned into countless fragments and splattered everywhere. Such a continuous collision of stars caused the originally extremely close relationship between the world group to become a noose around the neck of the entire world group. This caused the world group to rapidly advance in the direction of destruction. Facing this process, Luo Fan's heart stirred, and he did not hesitate to wave the spiritual light heaven splitting axe in his hand. Streaks of axe light shot out from the spiritual light heaven splitting axe and directly poured into the world group. Worlds that were like bunches of grapes began to be born continuously, perfectly filling the gap caused by the collision of the stars. This entire process of destruction and creation was simply like two brothers of the same sect that understood each other extremely well and cooperated extremely well with each other, were practicing their means. Seeing all this, the Broken Emperor frowned even more. With a light shout, the stars that filled the sky no longer charged towards the world group one by one, but started to charge towards the world group in large groups. If the previous collision of stars was said to be like ordinary meteors, then, at this time, the impact of a large group of stars was already like a meteor storm. This sudden and intense impact naturally made Luo Fan feel even stronger pressure. He had no choice but to increase the speed of the spiritual light heaven splitting axe. He had no choice but to make up for the loss of that world as soon as possible. These world groups were the defensive layer that Luo Fan used to escape from the control of the starry sky world. As long as these worlds existed, the Broken Emperor could not use the power of the starry sky world to easily deal with Luo Fan. However, if these world groups were completely destroyed, if Luo Fan wanted to fight against the starry sky world again, he would need to use more and more powerful means to be able to do it. It was precisely because of the importance of these world groups. Luo Fan had no choice but to do his best to maintain their existence. Of course, it was also because of this that the Broken Emperor regarded this world group as the target of attack. It seems that it's still not enough, the Broken Emperor suddenly said. With this sentence, he suddenly raised his hand and clapped forward. In an instant, another sphere like the starry sky world appeared out of thin air in front of him. After the appearance of this sphere, the surrounding starry sky world seemed to have been further strengthened. Vaguely, its strength seemed to have increased by several times. Then, with a slight tremble, the sphere split into billions of fragments. These fragments did not evolve into stars. Instead, after appearing, they began to converge into a long river, directly rushing towards the world group around Luo Fan's body. At this moment, Luo Fan felt a strong sense of crisis. He glanced around and instantly saw the long river rushing towards him like the Milky Way. He instantly knew what was going on. Driven by the sense of crisis in his heart, he opened his mouth and let out a loud roar. Then, the spiritual light in his body poured into the spiritual light heaven, splitting axe in his hand without hesitation. With the infusion of spiritual light, the spiritual light heaven splitting axe began to expand crazily. In the blink of an eye, it had grown from the original size of an ordinary axe to the size of 10 times its original size. Of course, although it had become 10 times bigger, it still did not feel awkward in Luo Fan's hand. It did not feel the slightest bit out of place. It still felt as natural as the size of a normal axe. After all, Luo Fan could almost be said to be the supreme emperor. After the body emitted these 2 rays of spiritual light, the body of Luo Fan's spiritual light clone became a little blurry again. Obviously, for him, drawing out the spiritual light again was obviously an action that brought great pressure to him. Similarly, if one carefully observed the broken emperor, one would find that after emitting another spiritual light sphere, his body seemed to have become a little blurry. Moreover, if one were to accurately distinguish, one could even see that the extent of his body's blur was even greater than that of Luo Fan's spiritual light clone. With one look, one would know that the price he paid was greater than that of Luo Fan. Chapter 16:24. The huge spiritual light heaven-splitting axe instantly split apart the world of the axe light, as well as the countless other worlds in the world of the axe light. It was true that the heaven-splitting axe could create countless worlds and worlds. However, before it could create a new world, it had to first break the original chaos. Therefore, it was obvious that the sky-splitting axe was not only used to create worlds. Its destructive means were much more powerful than anyone had imagined. The spiritual light heaven-splitting axe instantly collided with the spherical spiritual light fragment river that the broken emperor had blasted out. In an instant, endless cracks appeared in the starry sky world. These cracks started from the point where the spiritual light heaven-splitting axe and a long river collided. In the blink of an eye, they had already covered the entire world. In the blink of an eye, the entire world seemed to have become a combination of countless tiny fragments. It felt as if it was going to completely collapse in the next moment and turn into countless fragments that scattered in all directions. At the same time, the countless worlds that Luo Fan had created with the spiritual light heaven-splitting axe also began to collapse one by one. Compared to the starry sky realm, these world clusters were different. That was, there were countless living beings and cultivators in these worlds. Among these countless living beings and cultivators, there were even false sages that had been born. They connected these worlds together and formed an extremely complete whole. Under such circumstances, the sudden collapse of these worlds instantly aroused a strong reaction from the countless living beings. For a moment, countless screams and cries came from those worlds. Along with these screams, endless resentment surged out from the cries. These resentment were so strong that they had even turned into endless ghosts and gods that began to pounce towards the 2 sides of the battle, which was Luo Fan and the Broken Emperor. Under normal circumstances, these ghosts and gods, even a false sage, would probably not be able to withstand them. They would be directly pulled into the depths of hell by these ghosts and gods, and would never be able to rise again. However, at this moment, these ghosts and gods formed by resentment were not facing ordinary false sages. They were facing Luo Fan. It was the Broken Emperor. Existences at their level were already almost indestructible. This kind of resentment that was lethal to false saints was naturally like a light breeze to them. However, it didn't provoke any reaction from them at all, let alone make them feel any discomfort. However, in the face of so many grievances, Luo Fan sighed in the end. After all, he was the one who created these worlds. These creatures were naturally created by him. Under such circumstances, it was still very uncomfortable for these creatures to harbor such strong resentment toward him. His cultivation had reached such a level, and his Tao heart had reached such a firm state. However, it didn't mean that he had a heart of stone and was emotionless. As a matter of fact, to existences like Luo Fan and the others, Luo Fan was not a match for them. If they wanted to experience any sort of emotion, it would be thousands of times more intense than normal. The emotions that these emotions brought them were also countless times more intense than ordinary living beings. Therefore, it was normal for Luo Fan to feel this kind of sadness in his heart. Fellow Taoist, you've done all of this before. What was the point? Even if you created them, wouldn't they still hate you in the end? The Broken Emperor suddenly said. When Luo Fan heard this, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. One had to know that the Broken Emperor had no reason to say such words at this time. After all, this kind of thing was meaningless to the Broken Emperor. To the Broken Emperor, the most important thing now was the battle with Luo Fan. It should be the result of the battle between the spiritual light sphere fragment river and Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven splitting axe. However, the Broken Emperor, who had no reason to say such words now, actually said such words. No matter how one looked at it, it was unbelievable. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan glanced at the World Emperor. In an instant, he discovered that the World Emperor's gaze seemed to be a little distant at this moment, as if there was an inexplicable memory in his mind. Seeing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood. Perhaps the Broken Emperor had encountered what he was going through at this moment a very long time ago. He was resented and even betrayed by the creatures he created. Now that he saw something similar, he sighed with emotion and said at this time, understanding this, he smiled faintly and said, "They have the right to resent me, although I created them. Once they are created, they already possess a complete life and have their own independent selves. This kind of complete life and independent consciousness naturally have their own wisdom, their own thoughts, and their survival instincts have already appeared. In this way, they will naturally be afraid of destruction and will naturally resent death. Is there anything abnormal about this? I didn't expect Taoist friend to be so open-minded. I'm not as good as you." The Broken Emperor sighed. As he said this, he raised his hand and turned it slightly. In an instant, the spiritual light heaven splitting axe that was colliding with Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven splitting axe began to undergo a huge change. In the blink of an eye, all the fragments in the spiritual light heaven splitting axe condensed and formed a figure. At first glance, this figure looked like the Broken Emperor. However, it was tens of thousands of times bigger than the Broken Emperor. After it appeared, it was like a supreme god that could support the heavens and the earth. It raised its head and let out a shocking roar. As it roared, it suddenly raised its fist and fiercely punched at Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven splitting axe. Previously, Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven splitting axe had chopped at the spiritual light heaven splitting axe, but it was blocked by the terrifying power in the spiritual light heaven splitting axe, which was why it couldn't completely cut the spiritual light heaven splitting axe. Under such circumstances, the spiritual light heaven splitting axe suddenly collapsed and reformed. The power that blocked the spiritual light heaven splitting axe naturally disappeared. In an instant, the spiritual light heaven splitting axe advanced for an unknown amount of distance. However, just as the spiritual light heaven splitting axe was about to chop down, the figure that appeared at this moment was almost the same as the Broken Emperor. In just an instant, the figure that was tens of thousands of times bigger than the Broken Emperor's fist had already arrived in front of Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven splitting axe. During the whole process, not only did time and space distort, but it also seemed like the entire world had been twisted. Time reversal. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. With this thought, he didn't hesitate to shake the spiritual light heaven splitting axe. With a loud cracking sound, the spiritual light heaven splitting axe seemed to have directly opened up a new world. Then, inside the spiritual light heaven splitting axe, a new world was born. This world was completely different from the outside world. It was different from the starry sky world and the countless worlds in the surrounding world cluster. This world was the world of spiritual light. It was completely formed by the two kinds of spiritual lights that Luo Fan had mastered, decomposing and reforming them in a very special and mysterious way. Such a world of spiritual light was the beginning of summer. Not only did it not weaken the power of the spiritual light heaven splitting axe, but it also instantly turned into a source of power for the spiritual light heaven splitting axe. In an instant, the strength of the spiritual light heaven splitting axe soared several times. Moreover, the speed of the spiritual light heaven splitting axe also soared several times. With this change, the spiritual light heaven splitting axe seemed to have cut through something and directly hit the body of the broken emperor, which was tens of thousands of times bigger than the original position. Puff! With a soft sound, the body of the broken emperor, which was tens of thousands of times bigger, instantly collapsed. The countless tiny fragments made his entire body look like it was made up of tiny grains of sand. As the countless fragments flew in all directions, a pitch-black existence vaguely appeared in the midst of the countless fragments. This pitch-black existence seemed to have endless mass. It had an incredible repulsive force, and after it appeared, it began to expel everything around it in a frenzy. The speed at which the fragments splashed around became faster and faster. Seeing this, a strong sense of crisis instantly surged in Luo Fan's heart. It was as if that pitch-black existence was the eye of an existence that was a natural enemy to him. What is this? At this moment, such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. With this thought in mind, he didn't hesitate to turn the spiritual light heaven splitting axe in his hand. In an instant, the spiritual light heaven splitting axe drew a trajectory that could split the heavens and earth. In an instant, when it was impossible, it directly struck the pitch-black object before the spiritual light heaven splitting axe hit the dark thing. The closer the spiritual light heaven splitting axe got to the dark thing, the stronger the terrifying repulsive force produced by the dark thing. In the end, it even made Luo Fan feel as if he had used all of his strength and all of his means to make the spiritual light heaven splitting axe really come into contact with the dark thing. However, the moment the spiritual light heaven splitting axe hit the dark thing, the originally extremely powerful and terrifying repulsive force that even a king would find difficult to deal with suddenly turned into an attractive force that was several times stronger than the repulsive force. The entire transformation process was so sudden that Luo Fan couldn't react. He even felt as if this repulsive force itself was an attractive force, and the feeling of repulsive force before was just an illusion. Such a hasty change was simply fatal for Luo Fan. At this moment, he didn't have any ability to resist at all. He found that about 1/3 of his spiritual light heaven splitting axe had been devoured. This kind of devouring was not simply tearing apart a part of it, but completely devouring the essence of the spiritual light heaven splitting axe. What a strange existence! Luo Fan was secretly horrified. At this moment, he decisively cut off the part of the spiritual light heaven splitting axe that came into contact with the dark thing. In the end, with great difficulty, he managed to retain the remaining 2/3 of the spiritual light heaven splitting axe. From the looks of it, at this moment, Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven splitting axe had become broken. A huge bite mark had appeared, which had eliminated most of the spiritual light heaven splitting axe. It looked as if it had been bitten by something. At this time, because of the previous terrifying impact, whether it was the starry sky world created by the Broken Emperor or the world cluster created by Luo Fan, they had completely collapsed. At this moment, around Luo Fan and the Broken Emperor, there was no longer any trace of that world. There were no longer any traces of that world. and the whole place seemed to have completely returned to its original appearance when Luo Fan first arrived. In other words, it was a completely gray and hazy area. As for the broken fragments of the starry sky world and the world cluster, at this time, they had been completely swallowed by the surrounding gray and could no longer be found. That dark existence, after devouring a part of Luo Fan's spiritual light heaven-splitting axe, had also changed. At this moment, originally, it had no size and seemed to be just an insignificant. The existence of the singularity, which could not be detected, had already begun to slowly grow. Gradually, it grew from a small dot to an extremely strange shape. This is something I obtained by chance in the process of looking for the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Please have a look. At this time, the Broken Emperor's smiling voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Hearing this, Luo Fan sucked in a breath of cold air, an object from a state of chaos. In an instant, the way he looked at this dark existence had become completely different. What could exist completely in the state of chaos? It was either the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, the existence of the true divine realm, or the perfect heaven and earth. Any one of them, for Luo Fan at this time, was a completely irresistible existence. This black existence in front of him was actually at the same level as all the other irresistible existences. This made him involuntarily become solemn. However, soon, Luo Fan had already discovered that something was wrong. That was the Broken Emperor's body. But there was already a change. At this moment, the Broken Emperor's body was like a pool of clear water that had been poured into a vat of ink. A black color directly appeared on his chest, and from there, it began to spread up and down his body. In the blink of an eye, it had already spread to his whole body, making his whole body look a bit turbid at this time. In addition to the changes in his body, the Broken Emperor's complexion also changed a little. Previously, when he said that he wanted to have a fight with Luo Fan, he was still calm and rational. It seemed that he had reached this conclusion after careful consideration. There was no negative emotion mixed in it. But at this moment, his face seemed to carry a kind of brutality, which made his current behavior not seem like a decision made after careful consideration and weighing the pros and cons. Instead, it seemed like he was venting his anger. This is, his mind has been affected. Could it be because of this black existence? Luo Fan thought inwardly. At this time, the black existence in front of him had already grown to the size of a person. It was not in the shape of a human, but in a strange form. It had a pair of wings that were like the blade of an axe, and there were uneven wings like the blade of an axe, and its whole body looked extremely strange, as if it was constantly changing into various strange forms, as if it had no fixed form at all. What is this? At this time, Luo Fan had no choice but to cast his eyes on the body of this pitch-black thing in front of him. After this pitch-black thing changed into this form, its body began to emit a strange aura. This strange aura was extremely strange. It seemed to be incomparably strong, but also incomparably weak. Its strength was even enough to make Luo Fan feel afraid and vaguely threaten Luo Fan's life. However, it was as weak as the weakest of ants. At this moment, apart from the constant changes of its body, there was no movement, and it quietly floated there. Luo Fan's rich knowledge had reached an unimaginable level. Very soon, he had already discovered some kind of indescribable existence around the pitch-black thing. Time, beside the pitch-black thing, the essence of time, which was originally somewhat illusory in Luo Fan's eyes, actually gave birth to some kind of change that even Luo Fan could not control. This change was similar to the change of time that was completely independent of the body of a sage. It was as if it had suddenly broken away from the illusory state and had become a real substance, something that could even be controlled and changed by any ordinary person. Yes, it's the characteristics of a true sage. After discovering this, Luo Fan could not help but feel an indescribable sense of crisis. This kind of change of time was clearly a characteristic that only a true sage could have. The essence of a true sage was already completely independent of all time and space. It was independent of the chaotic state. Such an existence, wherever it was, time, space, matter, energy, and even everything else would naturally be independent. It was natural that they would have independence. In other words, no matter where a true divine stood, the flow of time, the changes in the flow of time, the distortion and rupture of space, the continuation of the state, and even the weight of matter and other characteristics of the real and false could be sensed. The density of energy, the model, the texture, and so on and so forth. Everything would be completely isolated from the outside world. It would have the characteristics that were completely suitable for a true sage. It would become incomprehensible to all existences in the outside world. Obviously, at this moment, the time around the pitch black thing. It had such a characteristic. Of course, only time could have such a special characteristic. As for space, matter, energy, and other aspects, it was still almost the same as normal. It seems that in terms of time, it has the characteristics of a true sage, Luo Fan thought. At that moment, the black creature with the axe-like wings suddenly moved. In an instant, it shook slightly, and its body quickly pounced towards Luo Fan. A sharp pain instantly came from Luo Fan's chest. The moment after this sharp pain came, the pitch-black thing arrived in front of Luo Fan. It was also at this moment that Luo Fan discovered the sharp pain in his chest. It was the wings of this pitch-black thing, the wings that were like the heaven-splitting axe. Time reversal. Luo Fan understood in his heart. Immediately afterward, a soft bang sounded out, and his entire body shattered, turning into countless tiny spiritual light fragments that splattered in all directions. The entire spiritual light doppelganger had been directly torn apart by the original existence that had the characteristics of a true sage. At this moment, Luo Fan already knew what it felt like to be hit by his spiritual light splitting axe, although it had been completely smashed to pieces. But this did not mean that Luo Fan had lost his spiritual light doppelganger. In fact, let alone a spiritual light doppelganger. Even if Luo Fan's original body was split into countless pieces, even if all of his existence was erased, it did not mean that he was dead. Now, although it had turned into spiritual light fragments, Luo Fan's spiritual light doppelganger still existed. He was still sensing the surroundings in the form of spiritual light fragments. However, at this moment, the power of the heaven-splitting axe was entangled with each of his spiritual light fragments. It naturally opened up one world after another around the spiritual light fragments, trying its best to integrate the spiritual light fragments into the operation of the world. It wanted to completely digest the spiritual light fragments and erase all traces of the spiritual light fragments. These worlds were opened up by the heaven-splitting axe. Although countless worlds were born at the same time, each world was actually at the same level as the world that could give birth to a false sage who became a sage with the mysterious mysteries of a true sage. The rules and laws were strict, and the strength of the great Tao had reached an unimaginable level. After being swallowed by such a world, every bit of Luo Fan's spiritual light fragments naturally received a strong impact. In a trance, it was as if every bit of spiritual light fragment had turned into a living creature and was thrown into the reincarnation of those worlds. As the reincarnation rotated again and again, he died again and again and again. He cultivated again and again. In the process of reincarnation, all traces of him were erased, and these spiritual light fragments were completely turned into ownerless spiritual light fragments. Fortunately, Luo Fan's cultivation willpower was strong to an unimaginable level. Even though his body had been shattered into countless spiritual light fragments, he did not have the intention to change his cultivation. Even if every bit of spiritual light fragment was swallowed into those worlds, even if it was sent into reincarnation after reincarnation, it could still return again and again through cultivation, retrieving the memories that had been erased by those worlds and finally restoring its original nature. Just like that, After countless years in those worlds, when those worlds were completely destroyed, all of Luo Fan's spiritual light fragments finally reappeared intact. Moreover, as it began to condense rapidly, in the blink of an eye, it had already condensed into a new Luo Fan in a gray haze. At this moment, only a few breaths had passed since Luo Fan's spiritual light clone had been shattered. It's even stronger than the heaven-splitting axe that I control, as expected of an existence with some kind of true sage trait. Feeling the difference in time between the worlds, Luo Fan could not help but sigh in his heart. Chapter 1625. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. With a sweep of his eyes, he discovered an unbelievable fact. That was at this moment, the pitch-black, unpredictable existence with axe-like wings had already inserted its wings into the Broken Emperor's body. And the Broken Emperor's entire body, at this moment, was already covered with countless cracks. However, there was not much pain on his face, only a kind of increasingly unconcealable brutality. Then, there was an earth-shattering explosion. The Broken Emperor's entire body had been completely blown up. It looked as if his entire body had suddenly turned into a cloud of smoke. The whole process was so strange, so incredible that Luo Fan couldn't react for a while. As an existence that had been broken by the heaven-splitting axe, it was obvious what would happen when the Broken Emperor exploded into pieces. In an instant, it was unknown how many worlds were formed out of thin air, directly swallowing every tiny, powder-like fragment. Compared to Luo Fan, who could detach from those worlds in the state of fragments and restore his body, the Broken Emperor's entire body began to gradually disappear after such a change. After all, there was not much difference between the Broken Emperor's level and Luo Fan's. But before this, the Broken Emperor was not in a normal state. It was unknown what had affected his mind, but it was in a tyrannical and self-destructive state. In such a state, how much of his will could the fragments of his body maintain? After this kind of preserved will entered the reincarnation of those worlds, the first decision it made was inevitably to destroy. That was to fight against heaven and earth. In this way, how could it be possible to detach? How could it be possible to return? Therefore, in just a short moment, even less than a breath, the large cloud of smoke that the Broken Emperor had turned into had completely disappeared. Along with the disappearance of the smoke, it was unknown how many billions of worlds have been created by the heaven-splitting axe. How many billions of worlds? Is this the legendary, harming others and oneself, or is this the Broken Emperor's own scheme? At this time, such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, before Luo Fan could figure it out, the pitch-black existence that had entered this world from the chaotic state had already turned around and faced Luo Fan again. This is troublesome. In an instant, Luo Fan could only shift his thoughts from the original Broken Emperor to this pitch-black existence in front of him. This pitch-black existence had the time characteristic of a true sage. This characteristic was extremely difficult for Luo Fan to deal with. At this moment, he could not think of any way to deal with him. At this moment, a strong sense of danger welled up in his heart. In an instant, Luo Fan recalled the entire process of his body being shattered. He instinctively turned the spirit light heaven-splitting axe in his hand and smashed it in front of him. Asterisk crack, asterisk, 8 deafening thunderclap rang out. In an instant, countless sound waves erupted amidst the thunderous roars, completely drowning out the surrounding gray haze. As a result, the surrounding gray fog completely lost its original form. At this time, Luo Fan still hadn't discovered what it was that had come here. However, that strong sense of crisis still existed. Furthermore, he felt a strong sense of danger. It was even more intense than before. Following this sense of danger, Luo Fan instinctively turned the spirit light heaven-splitting axe and smashed it behind him. Asterisk crack, asterisk similarly, a deafening thunderclap rang out. Similarly, endless sound waves were born and began to collapse in all directions, constantly colliding with the sound waves that were born from the sound waves. They were constantly tangled and fighting. They either merged with each other and eventually became stronger, or they annihilated each other and disappeared together. Almost in the blink of an eye, it was unknown how many worlds were born and destroyed in the surroundings at this time. Luo Fan already knew what was going on. This was clearly the pitch-black existence that came from the chaotic state using some kind of method to reverse the flow of time to fight with him. At this moment, Luo Fan's spirit light heaven splitting axe hit the wings of the pitch-black existence. However, it was not the wings of the present or the wings of the past, but the wings of the future. In other words, the pitch-black existence was using a method to reverse the flow of time to attack him from the future. Just as I said before, the past is certain, and there is only one of it. However, there were countless possibilities in the future. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan encountered this kind of attack at the same time. Moreover, every time he blocked the opponent's attack, it would inevitably cause the opponent's attack to slow down. However, at the same time, the attack did not stop at all and continued to attack him from another direction. Knowing this situation, Luo Fan suddenly had a flash of inspiration. In an instant, the flow of time around his body began to change rapidly. Of course, although the flow of time was changing, it was not as fast as that of a true sage, nor was it as fast as the pitch-black existence that had the characteristics of a true sage. It was just constantly accelerating, decelerating, and accelerating. Compared to a true sage, this method was only lacking in the reverse flow of time. In the midst of such changes, Luo Fan faintly felt that there were countless pitch-black beings with axe-like wings piled up around his body. They were aiming at different angles and using completely different speeds. They fiercely stabbed at him. This was the truth of the attack that he had blocked previously. There are actually so many of them. This is almost using the reverse flow of time to its limit. Luo Fan was shocked at this moment. Just one of the existences that possessed the characteristics of a true divine was enough to make Luo Fan feel difficult to deal with, and it was enough to pose a huge threat to him. Now, so many of them had actually appeared at the same time. For him, the threat and pressure had already reached a level that was enough to make him feel fear. Fortunately, he had now comprehended the effect of the use of time. Using different time dimensions to divide the surroundings, this allowed the countless attacks from different futures to truly appear. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would still be exhausted from running for his life. He could only constantly block the attacks that approached his body and couldn't fully consider these attacks. With a thought, endless spiritual light burst out from Luo Fan's body. These spiritual lights condensed into countless heavens splitting axes in the void. As the countless spiritual lights burst out, the body of Luo Fan's heaven splitting axes began to quickly become blurry and began to rapidly transform in the direction of destruction. Although the countless heaven splitting axes he condensed at this time were many times smaller than the heaven splitting axes Luo Fan condensed before, the one he was holding now was still the same size as the ordinary heaven splitting axes. However, this number had already reached an unimaginable level, so the pressure on Luo Fan was naturally much greater than that of a single heaven splitting axe. After all, this number had reached an unimaginable level. The pressure on Luo Fan as a whole was naturally much greater than that of a single heaven splitting axe. It could be said that at this moment, Luo Fan's heaven splitting axe didn't completely collapse. This was because at this moment, there were countless strange and unpredictable time dimensions protecting his body. This wasn't difficult to understand. Because there were so many time dimensions around him, the time dimension where his body was located naturally became extremely unusual. The result of this abnormality was that the speed of his body's collapse also became unusual. In other words, the process of collapse that could have been completed in an instant could be stretched to countless years at this time. Or, the collapse that could have been completed in countless years could be shortened to an instant. That was why this happened. Normally, his body would have completely collapsed and been destroyed in an instant, but it seemed that he could still hold on, with his body on the verge of destruction and collapse as the price the countless heaven-splitting axes condensed by Luo Fan circled around mysterious trajectories after they appeared. With a momentum that could split the heavens and split the earth apart, he headed straight for the pitch-black existences that had traversed through time and space to attack him from an unknown number of futures. Although those pitch-black existences were powerful. However, the attack method that it was using was still similar to the spiritual light heaven-splitting axe. If such an attack was used against anyone else, even if it was a god emperor or a world emperor, they would inevitably be battered and exhausted. They might not even be able to find an effective method to deal with it. However, such an attack was nothing to Luo Fan. It must be known that he was the one who condensed the heaven-splitting axes. Now, they were using such an attack method that he created to attack him. This was simply as ridiculous as using a flood to deal with the ocean. However, Luo Fan had countless ways to deal with the flaws of that attack. In other words, he had countless ways to deal with the pitch-black existence's attack at this moment. At this moment, the countless tiny sky-splitting axes had easily and freely struck the pitch-black existences in profound trajectories. Although the pitch-black existence used all its means to resist the spirit light heaven-splitting axes, although it flapped its wings even harder, faster, and pushed the attack to a more terrifying level, it still couldn't resist. However, in the end, it still couldn't stop the attack. He could only watch helplessly as the heaven-splitting axe chopped down on the pitch-black existence, causing the pitch-black existence to gradually collapse. Not long after, all of the pitch-black existences had turned into nothingness. Even their wings had disappeared from this world, as if they had never appeared in the first place. After doing all this, Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief. Looking through the strange and incomparably complicated time dimension, he instantly discovered that the pitch-black existences were still hovering there, as if they hadn't moved at all. What he saw in the strange time dimension just now was that the countless pitch-black existences were completely shattered, and all traces of existence were completely erased like an illusion. Seeing this, Luo Fan's heart moved. He instantly understood what was going on and couldn't help but smile bitterly. Sure enough, there are countless futures. In this way, it's almost impossible to die. Thinking of this, his mind was a bit numb. There were countless possibilities in the future. In other words, no matter how many times he killed the other party could choose a future that wasn't killed. At that time, the various futures of being killed naturally wouldn't happen. The other party would naturally remain unharmed. Such an existence was difficult to deal with. It was 100 times stronger than what Luo Fan had imagined. As expected of an existence that entered this world from a state of chaos, Luo Fan sighed. Thinking of this, he raised his hand and pointed. The heaven-splitting axes that had just destroyed countless future pitch-black existences changed direction. With the largest heaven-splitting axes as the vanguard, they turned into a long river and directly rushed towards the pitch-black existence. This rush directly tore apart the surrounding dusky existences. In the process, the surrounding sound waves quickly collapsed and were replaced by brand new, truly perfect worlds that were not of the essence of sound waves. When the heaven-splitting axes river flowed past, the place where the heaven-splitting axes passed had already become a large group of worlds. It looked like a long world river was constantly spreading towards the pitch-black existence. At this moment, when the heaven-splitting axes river reached the place where the pitch-black existence was, the pitch-black existence disappeared without a trace like a bubble. During the whole process, he couldn't see any details, as if it was originally just a shadow. Luo Fan frowned, and the heaven-splitting axes river slightly rotated. It directly circled around his body. Pu. Countless figures of the pitch-black existence appeared out of thin air where the heaven-splitting axes river passed and disappeared without a trace like bubbles. Seeing this, Luo Fan instantly knew that he had guessed correctly. That pitch-black existence really wanted to use the method of reversing the flow of time to bring his different futures over to attack him. Really troublesome. Luo Fan felt a headache at this moment. At this moment, his body was actually still continuously collapsing, but the speed of the collapse was extremely complicated due to the time dimension where he was located. Therefore, it was extremely slow, and the specific process was almost impossible to see. Now, he was in a dilemma. His mental state was counteracting his body, causing his body to take another step towards the abyss of collapse, causing his body to distort slightly. Fortunately, his reaction speed was extremely fast, and he quickly recovered. If I want to deal with it, I can only use the same method, which is to defeat and destroy it in countless futures. It's just that this ability is simply a method that only a true saint can use, and I'm still too far away from it. Luo Fan sighed, already making a judgment in his heart. At this moment, he discovered that outside the heaven-splitting axis river, the pitch-black existence had unknowingly gathered there again. Moreover, at this moment, the first sound he had made since he appeared came from his body. Destroy, destroy. This voice used a language that Luo Fan had never heard before, and he didn't even think that there would be such a form of language in this world. It was a kind of language that would naturally make people feel an indescribable tyranny, producing an indescribable and lifeless voice. As for why he could clearly understand what this voice was saying, this was not a problem at all. It must be known that even ordinary itinerant immortals had the ability to hear the will behind any language and naturally understand the meaning of any language. Moreover, Luo Fan was an existence that had surpassed the false sage and despair realm. Even if this language was extremely special and had incredible power, he could still understand it clearly. However, even if he could understand this language, it was now secondary to Luo Fan. At this moment, he could clearly feel an inexplicable connection spreading from the pitch-black existence to his body. This connection made him feel as if he could already control this pitch-black existence. But at the same time, along with this inexplicable connection, there was also an indescribable tyranny, as well as unimaginable destructive power. This kind of tyranny, this kind of destructive power was extremely powerful and strange. Even though Luo Fan's Tao heart was extremely firm and could even transcend the world and reincarnation after being shattered into countless pieces, he couldn't resist such tyranny and this kind of destructive power. In a trance, he felt that everything around him had become so annoying. Whether it was the boundless gray existence, whether it was his spiritual light, the sky, splitting axe river, or the strange time dimension, or even himself, they had all become so annoying. It made people want to destroy it. Is this what the Broken Emperor felt like before? This thought instantly appeared in the depths of Luo Fan's heart. However, even such a small thought at this time, under the endless impact of the tyranny and destructive power around him, he felt that he was already on the verge of collapse, as if he would completely disappear in the next moment, causing his soul to completely sink. With such a change, at this moment, Luo Fan's eyes had already become red. The expression on his face gradually became ferocious and tyrannical, just when such a change was happening to Luo Fan's body. In front of him, the pitch-black existence outside the sky, splitting axe river, also changed at the same time. On the back of the pitch-black existence, the two wings that were like the sky, splitting axe river, fell off. Then, the body of the pitch-black existence began to shrink rapidly. In the process of shrinking, there was also an unknown amount of gray existence being spat out from within. After a while, the pitch-black existence, it had already turned into an extremely small black that seemed to have no size at all, quietly suspended in the gray. At this time, the two wings that were broken off also began to gradually shrink, slowly fusing. When the pitch-black existence completely shrank into a black, the two wings had completely fused into a ball of spiritual light composed of two different natures. That was obviously the part of the spiritual light that Luo Fan chopped at the pitch-black existence, but was bitten off. The sky-splitting axe river's spiritual light. If Luo Fan was still sober and knew all of this, he would definitely know that this whole process was the process of the pitch-black existence that entered this world from the state of chaos, changing its master. In other words, Luo Fan's previous actions had somehow been recognized by this existence, causing it to actually transfer its original connection with the broken emperor to him. At this moment, Luo Fan was no longer paying attention to these things. At this time, his entire mind had fallen into a tyrannical and destructive sea. At this moment, there were endless waves surging in this sea, constantly hitting him, trying to sink him into the depths of the sea, into the bottom of the tyrannical and destructive sea. In a trance, there seemed to be countless of himself constantly telling him the beauty of destruction and the comfort of tyranny. And above this tyrannical and destructive sea was the scene of the outside world, which was where his body was. However, all of these scenes had already been distorted at this time. It seemed that everything that originally had no life or even a physical body had become an extremely ugly image, as if everything was tempting him to destroy it. Facing such changes, Luo Fan tried his best to protect the little bit of spirituality in his heart, trying to resist the impact of the tyrannical and destructive sea around him. The impact of the sea there was strong beyond imagination, and his mind, his will, was like a small wooden raft on this sea. Under the impact, it was already on the verge of collapse, and it felt like it could completely collapse at any time. This process continued with the passage of time. The state of his spirit and willpower that was about to collapse didn't improve at all during the whole process. It felt like he was dancing on the tip of a knife, and if he was not careful, he might die without a burial place. However, no matter how dangerous it was, Luo Fan's spirit and willpower were always able to escape from the sinking. One could faintly see that in the depths of his spirit and willpower, there was an extremely stable fulcrum. Chapter 16:26. At first glance, this fulcrum seemed indistinct, as if it didn't exist at all. However, when his life was truly in danger and his soul was in danger, this fulcrum began to materialize from nothingness and gradually crossed over from nothingness, producing an astonishing effect. It allowed Luo Fan's soul to finally support itself and not be completely submerged by the tyrannical ocean of destruction around him. This fulcrum was none other than Luo Fan's worldview of laws. A truly perfect worldview could allow a cultivator to exist forever in the state of chaos, and not be completely destroyed by the terrifying power of the state of chaos. Although Luo Fan's current worldview of laws was not a truly perfect worldview, it was already at the Emperor level and was only one level away from being truly perfect. Such a worldview could not allow him to exist freely in the state of chaos. However, supporting his spirit and preventing his spirit from sinking was not a problem at all. It was also because of this worldview of laws that Luo Fan did not ultimately sink into the tyrannical ocean of destruction. This process continued without end. As time passed, the fulcrum in Luo Fan's soul became more and more stable and real. After an unknown period of time, Luo Fan's soul completely recovered from the tyrannical ocean of destruction. The ocean still existed, and the tyrannical and destructive waves were even more shocking and terrifying than at the beginning. But, facing this even more shocking and terrifying wave, Luo Fan was not affected at all. His soul had completely returned to its normal state of clarity. He had also regained his perception of the outside world. However, although he had regained his perception of the outside world, Luo Fan did not pay attention to the outside world. At this moment, he was paying more attention to his soul, paying attention to his rock-solid soul in the tyrannical ocean. This can be considered a blessing in disguise. When he noticed the changes in his soul, Luo Fan couldn't help but have this thought flash through his mind. At this moment, in his heart, that was the fulcrum that represented the worldview of laws. At this moment, it was no longer the small and faintly discernible fulcrum that it used to be. Instead, it had already grown into a towering tree. This towering tree had taken root in the depths of his heart, and its thick and powerful branches were deeply rooted in his heart. It spread to every part of his soul and every corner of his will. It supported his soul and his will in an incomparably powerful manner. The boundless, tyrannical, and destructive waves crashed into his spirit, but the power was directly absorbed by the towering tree. Not a single bit of power could be transmitted to his spirit and will. It was also because of this that he was able to completely ignore the impact of the surrounding ocean. Luo Fan knew what was going on with a single glance. This towering tree, it was the manifestation of his worldview. Every tiny branch, and even every tiny fragment, contained Luo Fan's understanding of the world. His understanding of the universe, the state of primal chaos, and everything before the state of primal chaos. It could be said that if someone were to immerse their spirit into that tree, they would definitely not be able to withstand the information contained within and would be directly assimilated by that information. Even their self-awareness would disappear. Only someone like Luo Fan could sort out such a worldview bit by bit. Only then would he be able to not only withstand all the information within, but he would also be able to make use of the integrity of the information to support his own mind, so that his mind would not be impacted by any external forces and would not be affected by any external thoughts. This change was something that Luo Fan had never thought of before. Before this, he never thought that such a change would occur. He didn't expect that the worldview would have such an effect. However, after the worldview displayed such an effect, he instantly understood what it meant. Moreover, countless inspirations suddenly emerged in his heart, making him feel as if he had suddenly seen a whole new world opening up in front of him. I didn't expect that I would only notice this now. This really shouldn't have happened, he thought to himself, but there was a hint of excitement hidden in his calm expression. I didn't think that the worldview could support a cultivator to live freely in the state of primal chaos. I only thought that as long as the worldview was sorted out perfectly, I would naturally be able to prevent myself from being eroded by the state of primal chaos, and I would naturally be able to move freely in the state of primal chaos and live freely. Actually, how could it be so simple? The worldview must be completely integrated with one's spirit and will, with one's body, with one's strength, and with everything else. Only then can one support everything in one's body, and in the end, one's body can be completely free from the erosion of the state of primal chaos and not be completely assimilated in the state of primal chaos. As he thought of this, his expression became excited. An inexplicable intuition appeared in his heart. He had already found the true path to become a true sage. At this moment, what he was originally pursuing, such as the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and the pitch-black thing that came from the state of primal chaos, had become secondary. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind, and that was to go back into seclusion and work hard to turn his current understanding into his true cultivation. With this thought in mind, he shifted his attention back to the outside of his body and looked directly at the pitch-black thing that originally existed. With this look, he was slightly stunned. At this moment, the pitch-black object appeared quietly in front of him. The tiny black, that seemed to have no size, seemed to be trembling slightly. Every tremble seemed to represent the upheaval of the tyrannical and destructive ocean that his soul had encountered. His heart moved slightly. He raised his hand and grabbed at the air, and the black had already fallen into his hand. With a light pinch, all the trembling of the black dot calmed down. As the black dot's trembling subsided, the tyranny and destruction that his spirit and will had encountered also calmed down. From the looks of it, it seemed that in the blink of an eye, the originally stormy ocean had become a calm ocean. Following this change, the erosion of his mind and willpower by the surrounding ocean naturally stopped. So that's how it is. The tyranny and destruction came from it. It's just that if I don't activate this thing, the tyranny and destruction won't have any impact on my spirit. But once I activate it, the impact of the tyranny and destruction will be sharply strengthened. If there is no good way to deal with it, even an emperor will sink into it. The previous broken emperor is a precedent, Luo Fan thought. His heart moved slightly. The black dot in front of him began to increase rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had already turned into a figure. This figure's general appearance was similar to that of Luo Fan, but his face was pitch black, and it was impossible to see his specific appearance. The moment this figure appeared, the boundless, tyrannical, and destructive sea began to surge crazily. As the boundless waves surged, the corrosive power of the tyrannical and destructive sea suddenly increased by countless times. Even with the support of the world-view tree, Luo Fan felt an indescribable tyranny and destruction surge in his heart at this moment. Even the worldview tree began to shake slightly. Moreover, the trembling caused his spirit and will to tremble as well. Under these various changes, in the depths of his eyes, there was more tyranny, and it looked more and more different from his normal appearance. Fortunately, after all, Luo Fan was not the broken emperor. The power of the world tree was unparalleled. Under this kind of impact, it actually began to grow bit by bit. It gradually penetrated deep into his heart, deep into his will. It was the shaking caused by the tyrannical and destructive desire. Naturally, it began to become weaker and weaker. After an unknown period of time, when this worldview tree had completely stabilized, finally, when it could ignore the tyranny and destruction around him, this worldview tree was a little more luxuriant than before. The worldview tree had been able to maintain stability in the tyranny and destruction, and its support for the spirit had naturally been strengthened to the point where it could completely ignore the impact of the tyranny and destruction. Therefore, even though the violent and destructive ocean around him still created huge waves that were thousands of feet tall and constantly battered his mind and will like a continent in the middle of the ocean. No matter how the waves battered it, it didn't move at all. He no longer behaved like a wooden raft as he did before. Moreover, vaguely, this spirit was emitting an indescribable clear light amidst the tyranny and destruction. This clear light shone on the tyranny and destruction around him, faintly having a faint wearing effect, making the tyranny and destruction become less and less as time passed. However, the speed of this change was really too small. So much so that if he wanted to rely on this change to completely purify the tyranny and destruction, he was afraid that it would take billions of years to achieve it. Although it's a huge project, but if it succeeds, the benefits I will get will be extremely huge. Feeling this project, Luo Fan thought so in his heart. The benefits he was talking about, of course, were not the pitch-black thing that entered this world from a chaotic state. Although, that way, he would be able to completely control this pitch-black thing. However, compared to the harvest he was talking about, this harvest was insignificant. This was because the harvest he was talking about was the harvest of his spirit, the harvest of the fusion of his worldview and spirit. The existence of this tyranny and destruction was a great pressure for Luo Fan. So he needed to use the tree of his worldview to support his spirit and will at all times. In this way, as time passed, the tree of his worldview would naturally become more and more integrated with his spirit and spirit. Moreover, from his current feeling, the light that could purify this tyranny and destruction was a kind of light released after his tree of his worldview merged with his spirit and will. This kind of light had a purifying effect on the tyranny and destruction of the sea. In the end, it was tempering his spirit, will, and worldview. Therefore, this process was constantly carried out. To him, it also meant that his spirit, will, and worldview were constantly being tempered and deepened. When the entire boundless tyranny and destruction of the sea was completely purified, of course, it meant that his spirit, will, and worldview had been tempered to almost an extreme state at that time. Even if his spirit and will could not advance to the true divine level, it would definitely be extremely close. After all, this was the tyranny and destruction brought by the pitch-black thing found in the state of chaos. Its level was already close to or even reached the true divine level, just as Luo Fan was thinking about this in his heart. Suddenly, there was a strong sense of crisis. Under this sense of crisis, he suddenly felt that the tyranny and destruction around his spirit had suddenly increased by tens of thousands of times. If the previous surging was just a state of storm, the current surging was like the end of the world. The whole process of change was almost like the entire sea had been completely turned over. The top was the bottom, and the bottom was the top. The boundless and infinitely terrifying seawater crazily crushed Luo Fan's mind. That kind of terrifying impact directly made his mind creak. It also made the tree of his worldview, like a willow branch in the wind, begin to surge crazily. Not good. The pitch-black thing is going to rebel. In an instant, this thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Along with this thought came the scene. Before he encountered this tyrannical sea, he saw the broken emperor completely shattered under the attack of the pitch-black thing and completely turned into nothingness. He discovered this. His heart moved slightly, and his will connected. Regardless of the tyranny and destruction that was constantly surging in his heart, he opened his red eyes and raised his hand to slap the void. In an instant, the long river of spirit light, heaven-splitting axes that had been flowing in the void for an unknown amount of time turned slightly. Suddenly, it blasted towards the position that gave him the strongest sense of crisis. Boom, 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 boom. Countless terrifying sound waves came from that position. The sound waves were strong, and the essence was high. In an instant, countless sound waves formed in the surrounding gray, forming a boundless group of worlds, densely piling up in the surroundings. As the sound waves appeared, they began to increase, and the scope they occupied was constantly expanding. Finally, everything within the surrounding range of sight was filled with these sound waves. During this process, Luo Fan clearly felt that the countless spirit light heaven-splitting axes in the river seemed to have encountered their natural enemy and completely collapsed. The endless two kinds of spirit light that formed the spirit light heaven-splitting axes turned into fragments and splashed everywhere. They were constantly decomposing in the void, constantly evolving towards the smallest units of spirit light. So strong. Such a thought appeared in Luo Fan's heart. Then, he looked over and found out what was going on. He saw that in that position, the one fighting against the spirit light heaven-splitting axes was none other than the pitch-black figure. It was a silhouette that looked extremely similar to Luo Fan himself. It completely copied my method. Luo Fan's eyes flashed, and his heart was filled with shock. In the center of the heaven-splitting axe river, the figure's every movement brought about boundless two types of spiritual light. The two kinds of spirit light that Luo Fan was trying to unify were almost completely opposite in nature. Moreover, its use of these two kinds of spirit light was no weaker than Luo Fan's. Moreover, because it contained the time attribute of a true saint, the power displayed by it was 30% stronger than Luo Fan's when using the same technique. Luo Fan's spirit light heaven-splitting axes would be a huge problem for any other emperor. But for Luo Fan, it was not an obstacle at all. If he wanted to, no matter how many spirit light heaven-splitting axes came, he could easily break them and completely decompose the spirit light that formed the spirit light heaven-splitting axes, just like when he encountered the blade of the pitch-black figure's spirit light heaven-splitting axes. If he could do this, then the pitch-black figure that had completely copied all of his methods and raised the essence of the spirit light heaven-splitting axes could naturally do the same. Moreover, it did it more thoroughly than Luo Fan. And it was precisely because of this that such a change occurred. His spirit light heaven-splitting axes, facing the pitch-black figure, did not seem to have any ability to resist at all. They were constantly being destroyed by the figure's every move. Even the two kinds of spirit light that formed the spirit light heaven-splitting axes did not have a chance to escape and continued to be decomposed. Fake, it's fake. No matter what, it can't become real. Luo Fan had a thought. His body trembled, and the countless spirit light heaven-splitting axes suddenly collapsed. They completely turned into two kinds of spirit light and began to converge towards his body. As the spirit light converged, the state of his body that was constantly on the verge of collapse and destruction was gradually reversed. His body also began to solidify again and gradually transform towards its peak state. This change, it should not have appeared. After all, the reason why his body collapsed previously was because he had used too much spirit light that was extracted from that inexplicable place. This kind of collapse was essentially because his spirit and his will could not withstand the pressure of the spirit light, and had already fallen into a state of collapse. Due to this reason, there was no possibility of recovery unless he returned to the main body and received the main body's will to replenish it. Otherwise, no matter what he did, even if he withdrew all the spirit light, it would be impossible to recover. But now that his body had recovered, it did not contradict that fact. There was no other reason than the appearance of the worldview tree in his spirit and will. This worldview tree was even born because of the pitch-black thing that came from the chaotic state. It could even withstand the terrifying impact of the tyrannical and destructive ocean and the pressure caused by too much spirit light. So what if it was? Since the pressure could no longer destroy it and make it collapse, he could naturally easily recover it. Luo Fan's speed was quite fast. Soon, he had already condensed all the spirit light that formed the spirit light sky splitting axe back into his body, allowing his spirit light clone to completely recover to its original peak state. At this time, the pitch-black figure lost the obstruction of the spirit light sky splitting axe. In an instant, countless pitch-black figures appeared in the strange time dimension around Luo Fan. In an extremely strange posture, they tightly surrounded Luo Fan. Two kinds of spirit light surged on their bodies, and a terrifying pressure was constantly emitted, acting on his body. At the same time, the shadow that was besieged by the long river of spirit light sky, splitting axes, was still there. However, his body seemed to be trembling slightly as if he was preparing for countless attacks, another attack from the future. Fortunately, I can create a time dimension that completely belongs to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know how I died. Luo Fan rejoiced in his heart. While rejoicing, he slightly trembled and rushed forward. He clenched his fists and condensed the two kinds of spirit light into a pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasure that looked like a boxing glove. Then, he crazily attacked the pitch-black figures. These pitch-black figures were the replicas of Luo Fan by that pitch-black existence. If he used a method like the spirit light sky splitting axe to attack the opponent, because it came from Luo Fan, the opponent would definitely be able to easily disintegrate it. However, it would only be a waste of time and energy. Only an attack like this that completely carried out his will could defeat the opponent with the advantage of his body. It was because of this consideration that Luo Fan directly rushed forward to fight like a mortal martial artist. He didn't know how many years it had been since he used this method. After all, these black figures were not Luo Fan. Although they were transformed from Luo Fan's will and had almost all of Luo Fan's characteristics, the difference in essence made it impossible for them to do everything that Luo Fan could do. For example, this fist that carried out the will of his worldview. Although these black figures made the most correct response and used various methods to block his attack, in the end, they were unable to completely resist it. Under Luo Fan's fist, they collapsed and shattered one by one. Boom, boom, boom. The continuous and almost completely integrated into one, forming an incomparably long, explosive sound. The number of black figures around Luo Fan began to rapidly decrease. Chapter 16:27. As the black shadow was eliminated, the black shadow that was hovering outside his time and speed dimension trembled slightly. Its body began to slowly lose its original humanoid form and began to shrink again. Finally, it gradually turned into a black that had no size. As the black shadow returned to its original form, Luo Fan felt the sea around his mind gradually calm down. In the end, when the black silhouette turned into a black, the ocean of violence and destruction had already calmed down. It quietly floated there, as if it wasn't the one that had unleashed all those brutal attacks. Seeing this, Luo Fan's heart stirred, and he faintly had a guess. Could it be that this thing not only bullies the kind and fears the evil, but is also forgetful? Bullies the kind and fears the evil. That was what Luo Fan saw from every time his attack failed. It would immediately shrink and return to its original form, even directly handing over his control authority. As for forgetful, it quickly forgot the fact that it had already failed once before from the Black Dot's performance until now. The possibility of this being the case was quite high. In the beginning, when the Shattering Emperor displayed it, the strength it displayed and the brutality it displayed were so strong that he couldn't resist it. It even directly crushed his spiritual light doppelganger. Later, when he condensed it again and used this method of time dimension to disintegrate the countless attacks from the future, it quickly surrendered and shrank back to its original state. However, it quickly yielded and shrunk back to its original state, connecting directly with his mind. As if it had taken the initiative to deliver itself to him, it became his master. After that, when Luo Fan tested its power, it quickly rebelled and betrayed Luo Fan, attacking Luo Fan without hesitation. Now, after its attack was disintegrated by Luo Fan, it once again returned to its original state. If it wasn't for the fact that the connection had already been established, it would have tried to establish another connection, facing such a shameless and strange existence. Luo Fan suddenly felt a little helpless towards the strange existence that came from the chaotic state. However, I still need to test it out. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed. A bit of chi poured into the black, causing it to change once again, forming a human figure. After this figure appeared, it paused for a moment, as if it was looking around for an opponent. In the end, after failing to find an opponent, it directly targeted Luo Fan and pounced on Luo Fan. Countless black shadows appeared in the time dimension around Luo Fan. Luo Fan was already very familiar with such methods. Without any hesitation, he swung his fists, which were wrapped in gloves, and easily destroyed the black shadows one by one. The black shadows gradually disappeared. Not long after, just like before, all the black shadows in the time dimension were cleanly wiped out. Following this change, the black shadow began to shrink once again. This time, Luo Fan sensed the entire process in great detail through the spiritual connection with it, and instantly discovered many details that he hadn't noticed before. At this moment, there was a faint cowering sound coming from the black shadow. It really bullies the good and fears the evil. Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. With such a weakness, the value of this item was greatly reduced. It had a character that bullied the good and feared the evil. No matter what it was almost fatal. It didn't matter if it was a person, another creature, or an object, or a magic treasure. For example, if a magic treasure bullied the good and feared the evil, then when it encountered a weak opponent, it could play an extremely powerful role when it didn't need to be used. But if it encountered a powerful opponent and needed to use it against the enemy, it would directly cower and become a soft-footed snake. It wouldn't be of any use at all. Then, what could it be used for? With a helpless smile, Luo Fan casually picked up the black dot. In a trance, he seemed to be pinching a boundless world. There seemed to be an endless amount of power, an endless amount of time, and an endless amount of might contained within it. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find it. In fact, when his finger touched the black dot, he felt as if it had been separated from his body, as if it was in a completely different time dimension from his body. Especially at this moment, when he was completely adapted to his own time dimension that was completely different from the outside world, this feeling was even more obvious and uncomfortable. It's indeed worthy of having the characteristics of a true sage's time. In comparison, I'm still too far behind. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. Compared to the extremely small range around this black dot, which could only be sensed by the fingers that came into contact with it, his own time dimension was really far from it. The time change around the black dot was much faster than the time change around his body, and the range was also much greater. Not to mention anything else, the completely independent time dimension around Luo Fan's body could only continuously accelerate and decelerate the forward speed. On the other hand, the time dimension around the black dot could not only move forward, but it could also move forward and reverse. There were countless changes in the forward speed, and it could also move backward with the same range. Comparing the two, the range of change was almost twice as much. Apart from the difference in the range of change, The biggest difference between the time dimension around the black dot and the time dimension around Luo Fan's body was the way of change. The changes in the time dimension around the black dot were incomparably smooth, incomparably gentle, and incomparably natural. If one were to compare it with the black dot, one would naturally feel that this time dimension was the most suitable for the black dot. In other words, this black dot, it was only in this dimension of time that it was truly appropriate. It was truly appropriate. In any other time dimension, even if there was a slight difference, it would become unsuitable, and there would be extremely serious consequences. In contrast, although the time dimension around Luo Fan's body had some characteristics that were suitable for his body, it was only a little. More than that, there was a strong and twisted feeling. A feeling of piling up, but it was not natural at all. It was not smooth after understanding the gap. Luo Fan's heart slowly moved. He began to work hard to adjust the time dimension around him. Previously, he had constructed this special time dimension just to resist the attack of the black dot. He had more intentions to fight against the enemy, but he had not used it to completely suit himself. Therefore, this was not the limit that he could reach. If he wanted to adjust the time dimension to be the most suitable for himself and make it incomparably natural with him, this was not something that could be calculated. However, this required one to completely unleash one's spirit, one's essence, and one's everything. One had to constantly use one's everything to influence the surrounding time dimension and constantly use one's own characteristics to distort the surrounding time in order to achieve this result. Therefore, at this moment, Luo Fan did not have any thoughts in his heart. He just single-mindedly used his own soul and will to touch the surroundings, but he affected the surrounding time, trying hard to adjust the surrounding time in this process. Gradually, it changed in the direction that was suitable for him. During this process, the worldview tree in his spirit and will also changed. Its branches began to gradually extend, following his spirit and will, constantly coming into contact with the surrounding time. It also emitted all kinds of inexplicable effects, trying hard to adjust the surrounding time. In this process, time passed slowly. After an unknown period of time, a flash of lightning suddenly flashed in Luo Fan's heart. In an instant, he came to his senses. Why am I limited to time? Time, space, matter, and energy were originally very closely related. It was not too much to say that they were one, just adjusting one of them. He had to remove the interference of other factors. In contrast, it was more troublesome than adjusting all of them. Moreover, a real sage did not only have the time dimension as independent. The space dimension, the matter dimension, and the energy dimension were all completely independent, with an essential boundary with the outside world. Since that was the case, why should I neglect the essentials and pursue trifles? Instead of taking the easier way to get closer to a true sage, why should I take this more troublesome change, which is a longer distance from a true sage? As he thought of all these, a bitter smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. Immediately after, he did not hesitate to change the contact between his soul and the outside world, so that his soul and will was no longer limited to time. Instead, it made contact with everything in the surroundings, changing everything in the surroundings in a direction that was completely suitable for him. As he adjusted his train of thought, he instantly felt an indescribable feeling of ease gushing out. Previously, there was no progress at all for an unknown period of time, but at this moment, there was suddenly progress. As this progress was made, a gradually separated dimension from the outside world, the space dimension, the matter dimension, and the energy dimension gradually appeared. This combined with the original existence of the time dimension, forming an incomparably mysterious heaven and earth dimension. A gradually independent heaven and earth dimension that gradually belonged to Luo Fan. Under such a heaven and earth dimension, Luo Fan's body gradually became blurred. All the gazes from the outside world that looked at Luo Fan had to go through this inexplicable heaven and earth dimension before they could shine on Luo Fan's body. This kind of change, as time went by, continued to strengthen. At first, Only the outline was slightly blurred, but as time went by, his body gradually turned into a fuzzy and distorted light and shadow, gradually falling into a state that could not be described with words. After an unknown period of time, in this gray haze, suddenly, a figure emerged out of thin air. This figure was impressively the broken emperor, who had disappeared after being devoured by the Black Shadow. Where's that fellow Taoist? After the broken emperor appeared, he looked around, with an inexplicable expression in his eyes, and murmured. At this time, Luo Fan's figure had already turned into a gray light and shadow. Not only did it look like, but it was also very similar to the surrounding gray haze. If one did not think of it, one would never think that he was Luo Fan. It was exactly because of this. Although Luo Fan did not go anywhere and still existed here, after the Broken Emperor came here, for a moment, he did not discover his existence. Left? Or did he also die because of the chaos thing's backlash, just like my doppelganger? The Broken Emperor said with a frown. Suddenly, the Broken Emperor felt that something was wrong. His brows furrowed, and he carefully observed and sensed the surroundings. How could it be? In an instant, his expression changed greatly, and he let out a cry of surprise. Along with the cry of surprise, his eyes had already locked onto a certain location. That was where Luo Fan was now. To see through time and space, this was obviously a simple thing for an existence like the Broken Emperor. Although the heaven and earth dimension around Luo Fan's body changed subtly and mysteriously, it was extremely unpredictable. But after all, it was just the combination of the time dimension, the space dimension, the matter dimension, and the energy dimension. For an existence like the Broken Emperor, if he wanted to see through it, it was really not too difficult. Because of this, after careful observation, the Broken Emperor soon discovered the distortion of the heaven and earth where Luo Fan was. Then, through this distortion of the heaven and earth, he saw Luo Fan, who was in it. Could it be that he deliberately hid himself and wanted to sneak attack me? The Broken Emperor instinctively thought. Impossible. Although this kind of change is subtle and mysterious, it is too obvious to the perception of an existence like me. If he uses this kind of hidden means to deal with me, he is simply stupid to the extreme. This Taoist fellow doesn't look like such a stupid person. The Broken Emperor quickly overturned his previous conjecture. At this time, Luo Fan's body shook, and he suddenly got out of that inexplicable state. He looked up and instantly found the Broken Emperor, that pair of eyes, and directly met with the Broken Emperor's eyes. At this moment, such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. What a pity. If I could really combine the changes of these four kinds of dimensions perfectly, I wouldn't have been seen through by him now. Although a lot of time had passed, he still hadn't completed the project of completely changing the surrounding dimensions of the heaven and earth into a state that was completely suitable for him. At least, there was still a long way to go to complete it. Although the four basic dimensions of his existence had undergone great changes and were already very different from the dimensions of the outside world because of the gap between his own realm, or because his understanding of the essence of these four basic existences was still incomplete, he clearly felt that after these four basic dimensions were combined perfectly, it would produce an incredible change, forming some kind of unimaginable change. However, he couldn't combine them perfectly no matter how hard he tried. In the end, although these four basic special dimensions were not completely separated, there was an insurmountable gap and barrier between them. So they were still in a relatively independent state and couldn't be achieved perfectly. Because now the heaven and earth dimension around his body was already fundamentally different from the outside world at this moment, although he seemed to be standing in this gray and misty place. But in fact, he was already in another strange dimension, or in a strange space-time. His body was no longer surrounded by that gray and misty place, but an extremely mysterious space-time. Under such circumstances, he also had to cross the distortion of this world to see everything in the outside world. But as mentioned before, for him, who was at the Emperor realm, this was a simple thing. As long as he slightly changed his perspective, there was no difference between him and the outside world. Fellow Taoist, do you still want to attack me? Looking at the broken emperor, Luo Fan said indifferently, Attack fellow Taoist? The broken emperor sighed and said, That's for sure. The innate, inextinguishable spiritual light is an existence that can make people immortal. How can I give it up? Although they were separated by the heaven and earth dimension, whether it was for Luo Fan or the broken emperor, this kind of different heaven and earth dimension would not be an obstacle to their communication. So at this moment, their communication was as if they were face to face, without any reluctance at all. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, Hearing what fellow Taoist said, I suddenly suspect that fellow Taoist already knows where the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light is. Of course, at this time, the broken emperor had no intention of hiding anything, and said directly. Hearing this, Luo Fan raised his eyebrows. In his heart, he instantly understood the location of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. It was probably in a place that was not difficult to find. In other words, as long as he was willing to look for it, he would definitely be able to find the location. Only in this way, the broken emperor could say that he knew where the inextinguishable spiritual light was so generously. So that's how it is. Thinking about this, he sighed and said, Originally, I've already obtained great benefits this time. So I don't have much need for that innate, inextinguishable spirit light. But since the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light is in a place that is easy to find, I am somewhat unwilling to leave without taking a look. The broken emperor's expression did not change. Although Luo Fan's words could easily make people feel remorseful, it was obviously impossible for such a powerful emperor like the broken emperor to say such a thing. This kind of emperor-level existence. The firmness of his Taoist heart had already reached the state of being indestructible. Under such circumstances, he naturally would not be covered by all kinds of inexplicable emotions, and his judgment would not be affected by any words of his opponent. Therefore, no matter what Luo Fan said, the broken emperor clearly understood that no matter what he said just now, it was impossible for Luo Fan to leave without investigating. Even if he was just like what he had said, he didn't have much interest in the eternal spirit light, which was also the case. Seeing that the broken emperor's expression did not change because of his words, Luo Fan was not surprised at all. After he finished speaking, he said directly, Seeing that you haven't come for such a long time, although it is not difficult to find the location of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it is obviously quite difficult to obtain it. Why don't we go together and see who can obtain the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light? The broken emperor shook his head and said, I don't have much friendship with you. I don't believe that you will not interfere when I obtain the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Hearing this, Luo Fan instantly understood. After so many years of research, the broken emperor already had his own plan on how to obtain the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. As for how to obtain the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, he already had his own plan. It was even possible that the reason he hadn't come for so long was to prepare his own means. Thinking of this, he understood that if he wanted to find the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, there was only one way, and that was to defeat the broken emperor. Fortunately, after slightly adjusting the dimension of heaven and earth around his body, he felt that his strength had greatly improved. He had enough confidence in the existence of the broken emperor, who was also a clone. Therefore, at this time, he said directly, In that case, it seems that we still have to continue to fight. Of course, the broken emperor said indifferently. As he spoke, he did not wait for Luo Fan to make a move. In an instant, countless spiritual lights surged out of his body, directly condensing into countless stars in the void. These countless stars did not turn into a starry world this time, but directly formed a huge longsword in the starry sky. The countless stars in this longsword emitted infinite power, communicating with each other, connecting with each other, finally making this longsword emit a heaven and earth destroying aura. These countless stars themselves did not form a starry world. However, The aura it emitted directly constructed a vast and boundless aura world in this gray haze, an aura world that looked like a starry world. Immediately after, this huge and terrifying long sword slightly trembled and crushed towards Luo Fan with a momentum that could destroy the heavens and exterminate the earth. The long sword surpassed time and space. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived around Luo Fan's body, directly colliding with Luo Fan's dimension of heaven and earth, which did not change even in this aura world. In an instant, a terrifying sound of heaven and earth shattering broke out from the point of contact. Billions of unknown nature of the world splashed out from the point of contact like fragments, directly colliding with the surrounding aura world and causing it to collapse. Along with this unknown nature of the world splashing around, there was another existence. That was the spiritual light stars that had already been crushed. Chapter 16:28. However, the special dimension of heaven and earth was not damaged at all during this process. It looked as if it had been hit by a long sword carved from tofu. In the face of such a change, the broken emperor could not help but show a look of disbelief. How was this possible? The attack he launched now was even more powerful than the attack he launched with the power of the starry world constructed by the fragment of the pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasure. With Luo Fan's previous state of exhaustion from those attacks, even if this kind of attack couldn't immediately succeed, it would inevitably have an extremely obvious effect. It would inevitably cause his body to suffer a lot of damage. How could this kind of situation, where he wasn't injured at all, and instead completely disintegrated his own attack, appear? However, no matter how much he did not believe it, the fact was the fact. The result of this attack was like this. At this time, the broken emperor could only shout lightly, try to strengthen the strength of this attack, and try to condense the spiritual light stars again, and once again greet the strange dimension of heaven and earth around Luo Fan's body. Luo Fan felt the inexplicable shock coming from the dimension of heaven and earth, and could not help but show a faint smile on his face. The defensive ability of the dimension of heaven and earth was already beyond his imagination. Originally, he thought that although the dimension of heaven and earth that he had built had been separated from the outside world and already had his characteristics, after all, his own realm was still not enough, and he could not be regarded as a true saint. Time, space, matter, and energy, these four basic dimensions of existence had not reached the end and did not perfectly fit with him. Therefore, this special dimension of heaven and earth also left many flaws, many hidden dangers. Normally, if such a dimension of heaven and earth could somewhat block this attack, he would be satisfied. However, he did not expect that although it was only in the initial stage, the effect of this dimension of heaven and earth was already so powerful. Unexpectedly, the dimension of heaven and earth, which had almost condensed all of the broken emperor's strength, was so easy to completely disintegrate. Even his own body did not suffer much shock. In the midst of such joy, he suddenly thought of a true saint. His heart suddenly tightened. Even this half-baked dimension of heaven and earth has such power. How terrifying will the perfect dimension of heaven and earth of true saint be? Such a thought flashed in his mind, and he finally realized how big the gap between him and a true saint was. We can't delay any longer. Let's see how the connate, inextinguishable spirit light is and see if I can obtain it. Then, he would go back and work hard to implement the worldview of laws, unifying everything under the worldview of laws, and truly unifying the worldview of laws with himself. This is the true great Tao. As Luo Fan thought so, his eyes flashed. He lifted his foot and took a light stride, directly crossing over to the broken emperor. Under the special dimension of the world around him, although he could not reverse time like that pitch-black existence from the chaotic state and return his future self to the present to attack his opponent, he was still able to do so. However, it could also transcend time and space. As soon as he moved, his body had already arrived in front of the four emperors. During this process, no matter how the starlight longsword condensed by the broken emperor chopped down, The Broken Emperor was unable to move at all. No matter how he resisted, he couldn't stop Luo Fan from advancing. He couldn't make the dimension around Luo Fan's body move away from him. After all his efforts had failed, the Broken Emperor wanted to escape. However, it was already too late. In the blink of an eye, the specific dimension of the world around Luo Fan's body directly wrapped him up. Everything in this dimension was under the control of Luo Fan. As long as he was willing, this dimension could become incomparably hard. It was so stable that no matter how hard the Starlight Sword slashed, it wouldn't leave any mark on it. At the same time, because he could do as he pleased as long as he was willing, this dimension could also become completely non-existent, and he could easily absorb everything into it. At this moment, Luo Fan used this kind of adjustment to easily integrate the Broken Emperor's body into the special dimension of heaven and earth around his body. The Broken Emperor himself was an emperor that surpassed the level of despair. Time, space, matter, and energy, any of these four basic existences would not be a problem for him, and none of them would cause him any harm. Therefore, under normal circumstances, even such a special dimension would not have any negative impact on the Broken Emperor. However, don't forget that this specific dimension of heaven and earth contained Luo Fan's worldview. In other words, it was actually a world that had been unified by Luo Fan's worldview. Such a world was completely incompatible with creatures with a completely different worldview. All the forces in it were repelling and hurting all the existences with different worldviews. Therefore, when the Broken Emperor crashed into this dimension, he felt that his previous understanding of time, space, matter, and energy seemed to have become so shallow. All the knowledge, all the principles, and all the insights in his heart couldn't be applied to this strange dimension in front of him. Under such circumstances, the various means he had prepared to fight against this dimension naturally couldn't be used. Even the various powers that his body naturally emitted to resist the changes in the dimension of the outside world also didn't work. In this way, the Broken Emperor, who had fallen into this state, was like an ordinary person without any power. His spirit of joy was directly distorted by this special dimension of the world, and he completely fell into a state of confusion. All his perception of the outside world completely disappeared in the blink of an eye. The Broken Emperor's body seemed to have turned into a statue, floating quietly in the dimension of the world. Seeing this, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. I thought it would be more troublesome, but I didn't expect it to be so simple. Thinking of this, he raised his hand and gently pressed on the Broken Emperor's body. Boom! There was a huge explosion. The Broken Emperor's whole body instantly collapsed into countless tiny fragments. Even after these fragments collapsed, they still continued to disintegrate. Not long after, it had completely disintegrated into countless fine powder. In the end, it gradually disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared in the first place. Such a powerful being could easily make any despair or any false sage. Even the Broken Emperor, who had easily killed the Tsar, had actually done it so easily. Under Luo Fan's special dimension of the world, he had been completely destroyed, as if he had never appeared. After destroying the Broken Emperor, Luo Fan sighed. He recalled the various experiences he had when he met the Broken Emperor. Thinking back to the time before he obtained this special dimension of the world, when he was evenly matched with the Broken Emperor, and even almost lost himself because of the Broken Emperor's plot, he didn't feel that he was powerful. Instead, he felt that he was so weak. His current mastery of the dimension of heaven and earth was only half-baked. There was still a long way to go before he could reach the perfect level. However, this was already enough to easily crush him in the past. This was enough to show how much room he had for improvement. And having a lot of room for improvement was just another way of saying that he was weak. While thinking about this in his mind, he gradually regained his calmness. He didn't care about anything else for the time being. The most important thing for him now was to find the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. The broken emperor came to find the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light after such a long time, and the first place he arrived at was here. This meant that this place was extremely important to him, or this was the only way to the place where the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was located. After all, normally speaking, during the time between the destruction of the broken emperor's previous doppelganger and the arrival of the next doppelganger, Luo Fan should have found the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that the broken emperor thought he could find easily. And after he found the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, the first choice was, of course, to go to that place. In this way, whether the broken emperor wanted to find the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light or Luo Fan, he obviously needed to go to the place where the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was. But, in the end, he came here. Obviously, there were only a few possibilities that Luo Fan had thought of. All kinds of thoughts flashed in his mind. Luo Fan no longer hesitated. He spread out his perception, and his figure slowly walked toward the depths of the gray. Although he had fought with the broken emperor for such a long time, in fact, Luo Fan was still at the periphery of the gray. Now, although he didn't know where the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was, the general direction was definitely in the depths of the gray, and there was no other possibility. The deeper he went into the gray, the more Luo Fan felt a kind of chaotic aura that was getting stronger and stronger. This kind of chaotic aura seemed to have nothing, but also seemed to have everything. It seemed to have an incomparably strict order, as if all the smallest details had been stipulated, and it also seemed to be completely chaotic, as if no order existed. For such an aura, Luo Fan carefully sensed it, trying hard to distinguish whether there was an aura related to the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Such a process was not a simple one. Even though Luo Fan had initially condensed his own independent dimension of heaven and earth, and his ability to distinguish and sense the surrounding aura had been many times stronger than before, he was no exception. After a few days, when Luo Fan felt that he had gone hundreds of millions of miles deep into the gray, Luo Fan suddenly felt something. In an instant, he felt a kind of innate, inextinguishable aura from the chaotic aura that was so strong that it was almost the same as the chaotic state. This innate, inextinguishable aura was extremely weak, but at the same time, it was extremely obvious. It was completely incompatible with the surrounding chaotic aura. Found it. Discovering this innate, inextinguishable aura, such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. Immediately afterward, he turned in the direction of the aura without hesitation. As he moved in that direction, the chaotic aura he sensed did not change much, but the innate, inextinguishable aura became stronger and stronger. After a few more days, after feeling like he had traveled hundreds of millions of miles, Luo Fan's eyes suddenly lit up. Amidst the originally unchanging and boundless grayness, a light that was completely different from the surrounding grayness appeared. This light, its color could not be described with words. Being enveloped by this light, it felt like there was only eternity. As expected, it's here. Luo Fan took a closer look and knew. It was an innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. However, this inextinguishable spiritual light did not appear directly in front of him. Instead, it turned into hundreds of millions of worlds and gathered together in the gray, forming a cluster of worlds. The light that belonged to the inextinguishable spiritual light was emitted from this cluster of worlds. At this moment, this huge cluster of worlds appeared in this gray, indescribable existence. It looked like perfect worlds had appeared in the state of chaos. Luo Fan stood still and looked up to observe carefully. He realized that each of these worlds was of an extremely high level. At the very least, each world was equivalent to a world that could give birth to a false saint who had become a saint with the mysteries of a true saint. In fact, each of these worlds also had a number of false saints who had become a saint with the mysteries of a true saint. However, among these false saints, their cultivation systems, cultivation techniques, and even their worldview were completely different from what Luo Fan had seen before. They were completely different from all the living beings in the universe on Earth, as well as all the living beings in this world. In fact, they even looked like these living beings. Although all of them had the general outline of a human, they were fundamentally different from connate Tao bodies. It felt like they were living beings in another perfect world. However, this was not a lie. If these worlds were formed by the inextinguishable spiritual light, they would really be considered living beings in another perfect world. Don't forget that the inextinguishable spiritual light came from the state of chaos. They could almost be said to have nothing to do with Earth, the universe, and this world. The living beings that were born from them naturally did not follow the nature of Earth and the universe. They did not use the body structure of the existence that created this universe as connate Tao bodies. In order to obtain the inextinguishable spiritual light, I need to return all the worlds in this group of worlds to their origins. Luo Fan looked at the group of worlds. He could not help but feel a headache coming on. The inextinguishable spiritual light turned into countless worlds, which was a huge problem for him. If it was an ordinary world, it would be a simple task for him to return it to its origins and refine the existence that created the world. He only needed a single thought to do it. However, it was obviously not that simple for the group of worlds in front of him. One must know that these worlds were formed by the inextinguishable spiritual light. To refine these worlds was equivalent to refining the inextinguishable spiritual light. The inextinguishable spiritual light itself was at the true saint level. How could it be so easy to refine? Not to mention, after refining it, he had to return these countless worlds to their origins. This was equivalent to changing the form and nature of the inextinguishable spiritual light that had almost evolved to completion. The difficulty was also beyond imagination. No wonder the Broken Emperor couldn't take away the inextinguishable spiritual light after guarding here for so long. At this moment, such a thought directly appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Suddenly, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly felt something. He could not help but shake his head with a bitter smile and said, "Don't you know what giving up means?" At this moment, not far behind him, a figure that he was very familiar with suddenly appeared out of thin air. This figure looked exactly like the Broken Emperor. It turns out that you have set up a shortcut at that location. No wonder you have been guarding there all this time. It seems that my luck is quite good. This inextinguishable spiritual light should be fated with me. Looking at the posture of the Broken Emperor, Luo Fan nodded with a smile. However, he could tell at a glance that the Broken Emperor did not follow the grayish existence step by step like what he had done before. Instead, the Broken Emperor directly arrived here using a method similar to teleportation or shifting space and time. Thinking back to the area where he fought with the Broken Emperor, he naturally understood the Broken Emperor's preparation at that location. As for why he said that this inextinguishable spiritual light was fated with him, it was even simpler. When he first came to this gray place, there happened to be a shortcut that led to the location of the inextinguishable spiritual light. It was as if the heavens wanted him to come to the location of the inextinguishable spiritual light. No matter what, it should be fated. You think too much. That is the most common place for people who come here to look for the inextinguishable spiritual light. That is why I set up a shortcut there. However, it is not fated with you. The Broken Emperor said lightly. You seem to be in a hurry this time. This seems to be a part of your body and not a clone. Luo Fan's eyes flashed, and he instantly saw through the essence of the Broken Emperor. At this time, the Broken Emperor was more powerful than the previous two clones. Moreover, the essence of his body was no longer the pure spiritual light from before. It already contained a part of flesh and blood. This kind of manifestation. Obviously, it was similar to the God Emperor who had guided Luo Fan to this place. It was also a part of his body that had turned into a human form. It was not like the spiritual light clone of an existence like Luo Fan. Compared to the spiritual light clone, this body that was formed from a part of the body didn't have many methods, but its endurance was much stronger. In other words, With such a body, he could easily use many of the abilities that the spirit-like clone would have collapsed after using it. Fellow Daoist strength is really beyond my expectations. I can't help but be anxious. The Broken Emperor was not surprised that Luo Fan could see through his essence. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "This inextinguishable spiritual light seems to be very difficult to collect. What do you think?" He didn't want to continue arguing with him, and directly asked about the Broken Emperor's plan for this inextinguishable spiritual light. In any case, compared to him, the Broken Emperor had been here for a long time. He had been here for a longer period of time, so he definitely had a deeper understanding of this world cluster. Furthermore, it seemed like he was already thinking about collecting the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Asking for his opinion first naturally wouldn't be disadvantageous. Fellow Daoist, do you think I am the kind of person who would sacrifice myself for others? The Broken Emperor frowned. Of course not. It's just that I have found this inextinguishable spiritual light, and you can't do anything to me for the time being. In that case, why don't we sit down and have a peaceful talk? Luo Fan smiled. Have a peaceful talk? Fellow Daoist, do you want to give up this inextinguishable spiritual light? Not compete with me? The Broken Emperor said. Of course not. Although I am no longer in such a desperate need for this innate, inextinguishable spirit light, it still represents an opportunity of eternal immortality and indestructibility after all. How can I give it up just like that? Luo Fan shook his head directly. Since you don't want to give it up, then we are naturally enemies. What's there to talk about? The Broken Emperor said with a stern look. There are many ways to compete. Luo Fan continued to smile. At this moment, the Broken Emperor calmly looked at Luo Fan and didn't say much. There were faint specks of light on his body. Seeing this, Luo Fan said, "Wait. Fellow Daoist, why don't you listen to me?" The Broken Emperor just looked at Luo Fan. Seeing his expression, Luo Fan knew that he tacitly agreed. He smiled and said, "I still don't have a way to take this spiritual light for myself. But it seems that you already have a way. In that case, why don't we have a competition directly? Fellow Daoist, use your method to seize this spiritual light, and I will find a way to seize this spiritual light myself. Let's see who wins in the end. This way, we don't have to hurt our friendship." Hearing this, the Broken Emperor just sneered and said, "Fellow Daoist, do you think your plan can be hidden from others? You obviously want to secretly learn my methods from me, and then use your own powerful strength to turn the tables on me and expel me." Luo Fan could only shake his head at this time. It seemed that the Broken Emperor had been badly beaten by him. Now, he didn't even have confidence in the plan that he had thought about for billions of years. He actually thought that as long as he saw his method, he could turn the tables and defeat him. Forget it. In that case, it's up to you. Luo Fan sighed and said. The Broken Emperor's expression changed slightly. Just as he was about to make a move, a look of disbelief appeared on his face. Because he saw that after Luo Fan said those words, he didn't attack him. Instead, he turned around and took a step forward, directly bumping into the group of worlds. His whole body, together with the special dimension of heaven and earth around him, disappeared from his perception after a few flashes. Chapter 16:29. Throwing himself into the cluster of worlds formed by the spirit light was certainly a way to understand that spirit light, and it was even possible to refine that spirit light in the end. Top point avulks, however, this could only be done when there was no threat outside. If there was an emperor like the Broken Emperor, who had already found a way to refine the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, the situation would be different. Throwing himself into it was like throwing himself directly into the palm of the Broken Emperor. If the Broken Emperor wanted to deal with him, it would be too easy. No matter how the Broken Emperor looked at Luo Fan, he didn't seem like an existence who couldn't see this. However, at this moment, he actually rushed into it without any hesitation. The whole process was so straightforward that even the Broken Emperor couldn't react. How could the Broken Emperor not feel that it was inconceivable? How could he not feel that it was inconceivable? However, even though it was inconceivable and unbelievable, he still had to do what he had to do immediately. At this moment, After that thought flashed through the broken emperor's mind, he began to act. Countless spiritual lights surged out of his body. After the spiritual light left his body, it began to transform in the void. In the end, it condensed into countless trillions of great Tao runes. These runes of the great Tao appeared in the void and naturally stirred up the surrounding dusky existence, causing the dusky existence to undergo indescribable changes because of these runes of the great Tao. Countless strange lights and shadows naturally appeared on these runes of the great Tao. Different from Luo Fan, who could comprehend and extract spirit lights from the origin of the realm, the broken emperor was powerful. However, he could only extract spirit lights from that inexplicable existence. Therefore, normally speaking, the spirit lights he extracted had some characteristics of that inexplicable existence. In other words, it also had a similar sense of existence, the kind that left a deep impression on people at the moment, and they might even comprehend something from it at every moment. However, as soon as they turned around and looked away, they would naturally forget this spirit light, along with all the mysteries and principles that they had comprehended from this spirit light. However, this situation had changed at this moment, when this spirit light, with such a strange sense of existence, had condensed into countless great path runes. That sense of existence had completely changed. Originally, it was a characteristic that people would forget after turning around. In the blink of an eye, it had become an unforgettable characteristic. In other words, after the spirit light formed the Grand Tao rune, it completely reversed the characteristics of the spirit light. It had completely transformed into a property that could only be possessed by the spiritual light extracted from the origin of the realm. This kind of earth-shattering change, it was truly unimaginable, to be able to make such a drastic change in the spirit light. This was the Shatterer Emperor's understanding of the spiritual light, his control, and his comprehension of it. It was obvious that he had reached an indescribable realm, enough to make anyone exclaim in admiration, even if that person was Luo Fan. After these great Tao runes appeared, they began to rush towards the world cluster formed by the connate inextinguishable spirit light. There were simply too many runes of the great Tao. After landing on the world cluster, they began to pile up and connect with each other. Finally, they formed a huge body, faintly combining into a huge structure that looked like a silk net. Gradually, it wrapped all the worlds in the world cluster, causing all the worlds in the world cluster to be like insects that had fallen into a spider's web. They could only struggle powerlessly on the silk net. At this moment, streams of light flashed in the world formed by the connate inextinguishable spirit light. There seemed to be countless figures shooting out from each world. The power of the false age level combined with each other to form a strange spirit light. As it rushed up, it collided with the huge silk net formed by countless great Tao runes. It was very difficult. The silk net formed by the great Tao runes began to shake frantically at this moment. The spirit light in the great Tao runes surged everywhere, and the entire silk net suddenly became deformed. It seemed that if it wasn't for the strong elasticity of the silk net, it would have been broken in an instant. It's indeed effective. At this moment, the broken emperor had completely forgotten about Luo Fan. This was the only thought that flashed through his mind. With this thought, he moved his body again without hesitation. In an instant, more spirit light gushed out of his body than before, instantly condensing into countless dense, great Tao runes in the void in front of him. After these great Tao runes appeared, they were like meteors that quickly shot towards the huge death net that had already enveloped the entire world cluster. They gradually sank into the silk net. With the integration of these great Tao runes, the silk net that had been severely deformed by the power of the many false sages in the world cluster and was about to completely collapse and be destroyed quickly stabilized. Although it was still constantly changing shape and was still constantly being distorted, the feeling that it was about to collapse and be broken had gradually disappeared. The many false sages were false sages born from the world formed by the connate inextinguishable spirit light. Moreover, They had become sages with the mysteries of the true sage. Their strength was many times stronger than ordinary false sages. Even if they could not compare to the despair warriors, their strength was still considerable. However, this was not the most powerful aspect of these false sages. The most powerful aspect of these false sages, and it could even be said that the most despairing aspect, was the essence of the world that gave birth to them. Those worlds were formed by the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. They, who had become false sages in these worlds, contained the characteristics of the power of these worlds. In other words, their power had a little bit of the characteristics of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. At the very least, it was one of the characteristics of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. In this way, the power of countless false sages combined almost recreated the process of returning to the origin. It had almost recreated the process of returning to the origin. Vaguely, many characteristics of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light were reconstructed, forming a power that had more characteristics of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light than any false saint. Although this power was still not comparable to the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, because it contained enough characteristics of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, it already had some of the power of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. Such power was almost fatal to any existence that had yet to become a true sage. In the past, the broken emperor had wanted to refine the world group in front of him so many times. He had even taken a step back. When he wanted to take away this world group, he had failed because of the resistance of this power that contained some characteristics of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. In fact, there were a few times when his spiritual light clones were destroyed because of this power, and he had no choice but to send more clones over now. The silk net formed by the combination of the great Tao runes that he had created could withstand the impact of the power of the many false sages. This meant that the first obstacle in his plan to take away this world cluster had been removed. It was already the greatest harvest he had obtained in the countless billions of years he had tried to collect this connate, inextinguishable spirit light. It was also because of this that he was so happy and excited at this moment. However, this joy and excitement did not last on his face for too long. It didn't take long for him to recover. There was no other reason. Although the combined power of these false sages was a strong obstacle for him to collect this connate, inextinguishable spirit light, it was not the only obstacle. After getting rid of this obstacle, there was a new one. For example, at this time, when he wanted to pull this world group directly, he realized that the strength of his great Tao runes was not strong enough. There were billions of worlds in that world group, but they did not move at all under his pull. On the contrary, the silk net formed by his great Tao runes made cracking sounds in the process, and the degree of deformation increased by several times. If it was not for his fast reaction and loosening the silk net as fast as possible, the silk net might have completely collapsed due to the impact of his force and the power of the many false sages. I can't actually pull it. This thought flashed through the broken emperor's mind, but his expression became serious. Originally, he had planned to directly bring this connate, inextinguishable spirit light to his cave abode. That way, although he would not be considered to have completely refined this connate, inextinguishable spirit light, he would be able to announce to all the emperors in the world that this connate, inextinguishable spirit light already had an owner. However, it seemed that he was clearly unable to do this. Every world formed by the connate, inextinguishable spirit light was actually so heavy. The silk net formed by his great Tao runes could clearly withstand the impact of the power of the many false sages that contained some of the characteristics of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. But in the end, it still could not pull this world group at all. This made him a little disappointed. However, he was not completely disappointed. Being unable to immediately move this world group back to his cave abode only made it impossible for him to immediately announce his possession of this connate, inextinguishable spirit light. However, it did not mean that this connate, inextinguishable spirit light was completely out of his reach. In fact, compared to before, he had still made great progress. Even if he could not move it back, it would only be slightly more troublesome. With a slight thought, more spiritual light emerged from the broken emperor's body, forming great Tao runes again. However, at first glance, these great Tao runes seemed similar to the previous great Tao runes, but there was actually a huge difference in essence. The types of runes were similar, but the principles contained in each great Tao rune were already quite different from before. After hundreds of millions of such great Tao runes appeared, they continued to descend towards the world group. These great Tao runes were the first to fall into the silk net. Immediately after, it was as if they had pierced through a layer of air. They directly penetrated the silk net and fell towards the world group behind the silk net. The broken emperor condensed hundreds of millions of great Tao runes. Even though this world group was vast and boundless, these runes were still extremely conspicuous when they entered it. They even piled up with each other, looking like a long river. They charged straight towards a specific world in the world group. As these long rivers washed through those worlds, the false sages outside those worlds were the first to bear the brunt. However, they were all washed away by these long rivers of great Tao runes. The materials that formed the great Tao runes were originally spiritual light with extremely terrifying power. With the addition of these great Tao runes, their power naturally increased by countless times. Although those false sages had become sages with the mysteries of the true sage and also possessed a certain aspect of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, they were still not enough in the face of these great Tao runes. In the long river of great Tao runes, the bodies of the false sages exploded one after another. Although these false sages did not die immediately after exploding. Instead, they returned to the world where they became false sages. In other words, they returned to the world where they were born. However, after being blasted like this, the power that they had originally used to resist the silk net naturally disappeared at this moment. Naturally, it disappeared at this moment. In other words, as the long river of great Tao runes washed over them faster and faster. The range of the wash became wider and wider, and the number of explosions increased. It was formed by the power of many false sages. The power that blocked the silk net, which contained many characteristics of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, also became weaker and weaker. As the power of resistance became weaker and weaker, the silk net naturally sank deeper and deeper. In the end, it gradually approached the world group and was about to envelop the worlds one by one. Such a drastic change was like a bolt from the blue to those false sages. At this moment, all the false sages were desperately urging their power, almost disregarding the ability of their bodies to withstand it. They combined their power to resist the silk net. Although this world group was only a part of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light to the broken emperor, it seemed insignificant no matter how one looked at it. However, to these false sages, these world groups were their homes. No matter what the nature of these false sages was, they were desperate to protect their homes. Unfortunately, no matter how determined they were, power was power. As more and more false sages were blasted by the long river of great Tao runes, their resistance became more and more powerless. In the end, after an unknown period of time, when all the false sages were completely blasted by the long river of great Tao runes, the silk net was finally no longer resisted by any power and completely sank. In the end, without any reservations, it came into contact with every world. It's done. At this moment, the broken emperor's face showed joy. Now, all the worlds had fallen into the silk net. It could even be said that every world had actually become an intersection point of the silk net. Vaguely, the great Tao runes had connected every jewelry street together, completely replacing the original connection between these worlds. Under such a change, the communication and power between the many worlds in the world group had been completely cut off. At this moment, every world had become relatively independent, and relative independence was the most important thing to the broken emperor. He couldn't deal with the combined power of all the worlds, but he believed that it wouldn't be a problem to deal with a single world. These worlds were separated from each other, and each world became relatively independent. This meant that he could already start to refine these worlds. In other words, he could start to refine this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. For this moment, the broken emperor had been waiting for many years. At this moment, he naturally didn't hesitate. He directly changed the direction of his long river of great Tao runes and poured it into one of the worlds. If it was in the past, when these runes impacted this world, every world in this world group would react and naturally gather all their power to help this world resist the erosion of the great Tao runes. However, at this moment, the connection between all the worlds had been completely replaced by the death formed by the runes of the great Tao. So, even though the worlds had a weak reaction, it wasn't just that it was many times weaker than before. Moreover, even after they reacted, they couldn't transmit their power to this world through practice and help this world resist the erosion of the long river of great Tao runes. At this moment, a bright light flashed in the broken emperor's eyes. He immediately manipulated those great Tao runes and began to incessantly scour that world from the inside out, wanting to leave his mark in the depths of that world. He tried his best to bring that world under his control. This process was extremely smooth at first. Very soon, he had already come in contact with the core of that world and the great Tao of that world. However, just as his great Tao runes were about to be deeply imprinted on that great Tao, he found a fact that almost made him despair. He couldn't do it at all. The great Tao of that world was extremely slippery, and he couldn't exert any force at all. No matter how many great Tao runes he used to smash into that great Tao, he found that not a single rune could really enter that great Tao. That great Tao, it was like a whole body without any internal parts. How is this possible? At this moment, the broken emperor almost went crazy. His eyes instantly turned red. He had been planning this method of refining spiritual light for hundreds of millions of years. However, as soon as he used it, the result gave him a huge blow. His mark couldn't be left in that great Tao. To refine this world, it couldn't be completed. Even, it could be said that it was all useless. Without his mark, the great Tao would naturally expel all the marks that didn't belong to it in this world. In other words, what he had refined with the help of this long river of great Tao runes. The rules and principles, time and space, matter and energy, and everything else would be constantly eroded by the great Tao with the passage of time. With the passage of time, they would be constantly scoured by the great Tao, and in the end, all the imprints would be completely broken, allowing these various existences to completely return to their original appearance. After planning for such a long time, the broken emperor naturally wouldn't give up so easily. After using billions of methods, he couldn't leave a mark in that great Tao. Then, he changed to another world and started the previous process again. In the end, at the last step, when he was about to refine that great Tao, the same problem appeared. That great Tao still seemed to have no internal parts. It completely rejected the great Tao runes in this long river of great Tao runes. As for the mark that belonged to the broken emperor, it didn't want to be contaminated at all. Like this, one after another, he tried hundreds of millions of worlds, hundreds of millions of worlds. The situation was the same, and there was no exception at all. This situation finally made the broken emperor couldn't help but let out an angry roar. Casually, he patted the world group. The countless runes of the great Tao instantly changed from their original binding and refinement state to an offensive state, producing endless power suddenly blasted towards those countless worlds. Bang, with a muffled sound, countless great Tao runes flew out. The huge silk net formed by the runes directly collapsed in this process, turning into countless great Tao runes again, splashing everywhere. It was so much so that even those runes of the Grand Tao were constantly collapsing and dissipating, gradually turning into countless spiritual lights that spread out. After all, these great Tao runes were formed by the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. They could even exist in the primal chaos for a long time. Although the broken emperor was angry, how could it be compared to the pressure of the primal chaos? Naturally, it was impossible to destroy them, and if he couldn't destroy them, the Broken Emperor would definitely be at a disadvantage. After all, the Broken Emperor wasn't ordinary. After venting for a while, he quickly regained his calmness. With a thought, all the scattered spiritual lights and great Tao runes began to quickly condense towards him. In the blink of an eye, they had already returned to his body, as if they had never left. Could it be that he expected that I wouldn't succeed? Suddenly, the Broken Emperor had a flash of inspiration, and such a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. That he was referring to was, of course, Luo Fan. Thinking of this, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. While he was secretly hating in his heart, he also gave birth to an inexplicable curiosity. He was curious about what Luo Fan was doing now, and what effect he had achieved. Once such curiosity was born, it couldn't be suppressed. Very soon, the Broken Emperor spread out his perception, enveloping this group of worlds in a faintly discernible manner. He began to search for the existence of Luo Fan in these worlds. As for whether he could sense it or not, there was no doubt about it. After all, although the worlds in this group of worlds were formed by the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, they themselves had incredible power. Even the recoil alone could make the Broken Emperor depressed. However, if he didn't take the initiative to provoke or attack these worlds, his power wouldn't be revealed. Chapter 1630. With this, the Broken Emperor discovered a surprising fact. At this moment, Luo Fan was indeed in one of those worlds. However, he seemed to be walking leisurely in that world, almost as if he was on a tour. He didn't seem to want to refine that world or the spiritual light at all. Just as the Broken Emperor placed his senses on Luo Fan sensed it. He raised his head slightly, and his eyes directly penetrated through the layers of worlds, through the grayish existence that contained some chaotic aura, and directly saw the Broken Emperor. Seeing his appearance, Luo Fan instantly knew that he had guessed right. The Broken Emperor really had no way to deal with this group of worlds. His original plan really didn't work. Therefore, he only smiled and said, "Now, I wonder if we can move on our own?" Hearing this, the Broken Emperor's face became rather unsightly. Originally, he couldn't be sure why Luo Fan rushed into those worlds without hesitation when he knew that he was going to refine these worlds and turn the whole innate, inextinguishable spiritual light into his own. But now, he was completely sure. This was obviously because Luo Fan didn't think highly of his plan and didn't think highly of his behavior. He thought that no matter what method he used, he couldn't really refine this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Understanding this, even the Broken Emperor couldn't help but feel angry. After all, he wasn't an emotionless robot. Of course you can. However, no matter how angry he was, he had no choice. However, no matter how angry he was, he could only clench his teeth and spit out such a sentence. He was extremely unwilling to say this sentence, but he had to say it. After all, Luo Fan's strength was obviously above him, and at this time he didn't have any way to refine this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. In this case, even if he tangled with Luo Fan, it would only be a waste of time. On the contrary, it would delay the time he needed to think of a way to refine this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Therefore, it was better to do as Luo Fan said, and not contact each other directly. Do their own thing. In particular, he actually didn't think that Luo Fan could refine this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light in a short time. This was the normal mentality of a living being. If they couldn't complete a task after working hard for a long time, they would naturally think that others couldn't complete it in a short time. Although the Broken Emperor wasn't an ordinary living being, he couldn't avoid this mentality. Although the two of them were separated by such a long distance, and even several worlds. They were separated by several layers of space-time, but there was no problem in communicating. Luo Fan's words directly went into his ears, and his words also went into Luo Fan's ears. Hearing his words, Luo Fan only smiled and said, "If that's the case, then don't peep at me anymore." While speaking, the dimension of heaven and earth that completely belonged to him shook slightly, and the Broken Emperor discovered that all his perception of Luo Fan had completely disappeared, even though he knew that Luo Fan was still there. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see him clearly. This change made the Broken Emperor's heart skip a beat. Instantly, such a thought flashed through his mind. He actually got rid of my perception so easily. Luo Fan had a way to isolate his perception. He was not surprised to see that it was shielded from his prying eyes. What surprised him was that Luo Fan was actually able to do it so easily. During the whole process, he couldn't even see any artificial traces. It was as if Luo Fan wasn't there at all, and what he saw before was just an illusion. Such a change was very obvious. It meant that in this aspect, Luo Fan's strength was much stronger than he had imagined. When he found this out, the Broken Emperor suddenly had some inexplicable uneasiness. Am I really going to lose? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Under such nervousness, he suddenly gritted his teeth and made a decision that was impossible to make in the past. With a shake of his body, he turned into a beam of flowing light and plunged into the cluster of worlds. He directly drilled into one of the seemingly ordinary worlds. However, the world he drilled into was not the world that Luo Fan was in now. Instead, it was in a completely different world, one that was even extremely far away. Entering this world could be regarded as a way to refine this cluster of worlds and this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. However, regarding this method, the Broken Emperor had never thought that he would have to carry it out himself. First of all, he needed to guard outside and not let other emperors come and compete with him. Secondly, the number of worlds in this world was just too much. Even if he spent a day refining each world, it would probably take him billions of trillion years to refine all of these worlds. In the end, he still had to return all of these worlds to their origins, and the time needed for that would not be any shorter than refining these worlds. Not to mention that it would definitely take him more than a day to refine each world. However, at this time, because of the arrival of Luo Fan, because of Luo Fan's actions, he had no choice but to let go of his previous insistence. As for the first reason, now that Luo Fan had arrived, he couldn't stop him. Since that was the case, what was the difference between having a few more and only one? Naturally, he didn't care about stopping other emperors from coming. As for the second reason, in this situation where he had no other choice, it was also the only choice. Moreover, apart from this being the only way, he also wanted to cause some trouble for Luo Fan so that he wouldn't be so successful. After all the worlds in this cluster of worlds were a whole. Only after all these worlds had returned to their original state could that innate, inextinguishable spiritual light be formed. If he wanted to stop this process, he didn't need much. He only needed to seize one of the worlds, and that would naturally cause great trouble for Luo Fan, making it impossible for Luo Fan to refine all these worlds. Of course, all of this was based on the premise that Luo Fan entered these worlds to refine them separately, and eventually return to their original state, restoring the essence of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. If Luo Fan had other ideas, what he was doing now was obviously futile. At this time, Luo Fan, who was in another world, just smiled slightly. Although he hid himself, he didn't give up on paying attention to the Broken Emperor. When the Broken Emperor turned into a ray of light and entered that cluster of worlds, he had already discovered his choice. With a slight movement of his heart, he already knew what the Broken Emperor was thinking. What a pity. You guessed wrong. At this moment, such a thought flashed through his mind. However, it was just such a thought. Very soon, he shifted all his thoughts away from the Broken Emperor and began to focus on the world in front of him. He threw himself into this world. In fact, it was not like what the Broken Emperor thought. It was to separate and refine these worlds, and finally merge all the worlds, returning to their original state to form that innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. On the contrary, he threw himself into these worlds just to look at them, just to feel the mysteries of these worlds. Obtaining the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was indeed a great benefit. It could even be said that it was second only to becoming a true sage. But For him now, this was not the most important thing. For him now, there were two most important things. First, to perfect his own worldview. Second, to fully integrate the worldview with his body and mind, so that the worldview could truly integrate everything about him and truly become the root that supported his existence. These 2 points were the real foundation for him to become a true sage. In addition to these 2 points, everything else, even this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, they were all secondary. As for what he was doing now, to obtain his own independent dimension of heaven and earth, it seemed to have nothing to do with these 2 goals. In fact, it was incomparably closely related to the second point, to fully integrate the worldview with his body and mind. To integrate the worldview with his body and mind, this itself included the content of integrating the surrounding space-time. And to integrate the surrounding space-time, this was actually another way of saying that he had obtained his own independent dimension of heaven and earth that was completely adapted to his own dimension of heaven and earth. In other words, of the 2, the independent dimension of heaven and earth that Luo Fan had worked so hard to obtain before belonged to the second most important task. It was precisely because Luo Fan was clear about his task that he actually did not have much intention to perfectly refine this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that he knew would take a lot of time to refine. However, not having the intention to perfectly refine it did not mean that he did not have any thoughts about this worldview. What was the purpose of refining this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light? In addition to obtaining its characteristics of eternal indestructibility and indestructibility, it was more to comprehend the mysteries of eternal indestructibility and indestructibility. In fact, anyone who obtained the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light would pay more attention to this point, be it world emperors, divine emperors, or other third-grade emperors. Since the most important thing to refine the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was to comprehend the mysteries within, as long as there was such an opportunity, it would be acceptable without the loss of refining the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. And obviously, this innate, inextinguishable spirit light was now placed here. Although the form of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light was not what Luo Fan was most satisfied with and wanted, it was still an innate, inextinguishable spirit light. The mysteries contained within it were still not reduced at all. In this case, wouldn't it be fine as long as he directly immersed himself in comprehending the mysteries within? Why did he have to refine it? This was the real reason why Luo Fan immersed himself in this world. It was also because of this idea that Luo Fan did not think of a way to drive the broken emperor away before taking action. Instead, he directly avoided the broken emperor's means and directly immersed himself in this world. The world that Luo Fan was in now was an extremely grand and vast world. The creatures in this world looked like humans, but they were completely different from Luo Fan's innate Taoism body. Instead, they had a foundation that was completely different from the innate Taoism body on Earth, the universe, and the untainted world. This entire world was filled with an endless amount of rich yuan qi, the pneuma's density. It was not even thinner than the untainted world when the world had just been created. Furthermore, there were strands of origin energy within the origin energy. The aura of the innate inextinguishable, this aura of the innate inextinguishable was extremely weak and obscure. Even if it was Luo Fan, he still needed to be extremely serious and concentrated to be able to sense it. It was emitted from the source of this world, filling the whole world and enveloping all the space-time in this world. It was also because of this aura. Just now, the pneuma in this world did not become thinner because of the passage of time. There were no signs of consumption because of the large number of cultivating creatures. It was almost in a state where it did not increase, decrease, or change easily, although it had not been long since he entered this state. However, with Luo Fan's powerful perception ability, he had already clearly sensed the difference between the great Tao of this world and other worlds. In the great Tao of this world, not only did it contain the infinite mysteries of the true sage, but it also felt that compared to the great Tao of the perfect world like the earth, the universe, and the untainted world, it was only slightly inferior in essence. In addition to this world, there were also traces of the characteristics of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light on the great Tao. This characteristic was also extremely obscure and weak. Its existence seemed to only support the existence of the great Tao. In fact, it was precisely because of the existence of the innate, inextinguishable characteristic that the great Tao completely rejected any other existence that did not belong to the innate, inextinguishable characteristic. Even Luo Fan. At this time, there was no way for him to leave his power, his perception, and any of his imprints in the great Tao. He could not even directly enter the great Tao. It was also because he could not do it that Luo Fan was even more certain that the Broken Emperor could not do it either. This was the true source of his relief in the world that Luo Fan entered. There were 18 false saints. These 18 false saints had all achieved their achievements through the mysteries of the true sage. Every false saint was many times stronger than an ordinary false saint. In fact, because there were too many mysteries of the true sage, they were only slightly weaker than the real, despairing people. These 18 sages had a supreme status in this world. They had opened up the 18 heavens in the upper levels of this world. The 18 heavens were isolated from the mortal world. Although there were countless legends about the 18 heavens in this world, no one other than the false saint had truly entered the 18 heavens. Therefore, most cultivators did not even think that the 18 heavens existed. The flow of time in this world was hundreds of times faster than the outside world. Previously, the Broken Emperor had used the Great Tao runes to attack this group of worlds and wanted to refine this group of worlds. However, in reality, to this world, it had already been a few years. To the living beings in this world, a few years ago, there was a sudden, shocking tremor in the world. Immediately after, the 18 heavens that were originally hidden in the void suddenly revealed themselves. Then, the 18 supreme sages left this world and began to fight with some kind of external terrifying threat. It was also at this time that the countless living beings in this world truly confirmed that there were 18 heavens and 18 sages above the void in the highest levels of this world. However, it was also because of this confirmation that they were almost in despair in the following period of time. That was because they directly saw the 18 sages being defeated by that terrifying threat and being swept back into the 18 heavens powerlessly. Even after that, the 18 heavens were sealed by countless unfathomable runes that no living beings or cultivators in this world could understand. In the end, this lasted for several years before the runes collapsed and disappeared, causing the 18 heavens to disappear once more for all living beings in this world. Such a drastic change was a change that overturned their worldview. For a moment, the atmosphere of this world changed inexplicably. A sense of urgency that was different from the past began to appear among all living beings. It began to strengthen, causing the cultivation world, which had originally been a pool of stagnant water, to gradually become lively. Since this world has changed so much, the other world should be the same. For these worlds, Daoist Shattering Emperor has done a good deed. Luo Fan sighed with emotion as he watched the entire process. The world of cultivation was like a pool of stagnant water. It was the source of decay. Even if the world evolved from this innate, inextinguishable spirit light, possessed a trace of innate indestructibility, it could only slightly prolong the process of its decline. It couldn't change this process at all. Only a cultivation world that was full of vitality and was filled with a sense of urgency would be able to develop ceaselessly, and only then would it be possible to climb towards an even higher peak. Luo Fan's current location. It was in a city, in a very ordinary, mortal city. Although he had obtained his own independent dimension of heaven and earth. But at this time, Luo Fan didn't seem to have any abnormalities at all. He looked just like an ordinary mortal scholar. An independent dimension of heaven and earth could indeed completely isolate all other people's perception and peeping. But It didn't mean that an independent dimension of heaven and earth only existed in such a form. In fact, this independent dimension of heaven and earth represented a kind of freedom. In other words, as long as Luo Fan was willing, he could make anyone see him, and he could also make himself invisible. Everything depended on his will, and it wouldn't be affected by any other external forces. Now, Luo Fan used this method to let mortals see him. Although he hadn't been in this world for a long time, Luo Fan's understanding of this world was actually quite deep. The customs and practices of this world, the folk customs, the current situation of this world's cultivation world, and so on. He had already seen them all clearly. He had even completely mastered the cultivation system of this world, although it's unintentional. But the cultivation system developed in this world does contain a trace of innate indestructibility. Sitting in a restaurant, Luo Fan sighed with emotion. The cultivation system of this world. It was completely different from any world that Luo Fan had seen before. The specific cultivation method naturally didn't mean anything to Luo Fan, but the essence revealed a trace of the characteristics that could only be found in this world, and it made Luo Fan feel a little amazed. Since the beginning of cultivation, the cultivation system of this world had already begun to constantly absorb the innate indestructibility of this world as they sensed the vitality. Although for living creatures, they couldn't retain this innate indestructibility at all, and they couldn't make themselves truly innate indestructibility. But as long as their cultivation deepened and time passed, they would be more and more infiltrated and eroded by the innate indestructibility. Eventually, their bodies would gradually transform in the direction of innate indestructibility. Needless to say, the most specific manifestation was the effect of this world's cultivation system on increasing one's lifespan. It was so powerful that it was really amazing. For the cultivators of Earth's universe, before they reached the itinerant immortal realm, no matter how rich the surrounding vitality was, no matter how much they cultivated, they could at most obtain a few thousand years of lifespan. Once they exceeded the age limit, any living creature would definitely die of old age. In fact, it wasn't just the Earth's universe. It was the same in the primordial world, and even in a big world like the Great Tianyuan world. But this world was different. Any living creature, as long as they began to cultivate, as long as they retained any bit of vitality in their bodies, their lifespan would exceed their own shackles, no matter how little vitality there was. Those who could originally only live for 100 years could even live for 200 to 300 years because of this breath of vitality. Those who could originally live for a few hundred years could even live for more than 1,000 years because of this breath of vitality. Even a breath of vitality was like that. If they continued to cultivate, the effect of increasing their lifespan would naturally be even greater. They didn't need to reach the itinerant immortal realm. They only needed to reach the level of a martial arts master, and it was even enough to push their lifespan to the level of tens of thousands of years. If the cultivation method was more exquisite, they could directly obtain immortality at the level of a martial arts master and have an endless lifespan, which was not something unbelievable. It was also because of this characteristic of this world's cultivation system that the rotation of time in this world was hundreds of times longer than in other worlds. In other worlds, such as Earth's universe, a generation was 20 to 30 years, but in this world, a generation was 2,000 to 3,000 years. Chapter 16:31. As Luo Fan experienced the cultivation system of this world, he sighed inwardly. The cultivation method of this world allowed him to faintly sense the characteristics of this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, and he had a slight understanding of the mystery of this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. The innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was so high-end that it could even reach the level of a true sage. However, this kind of existence was actually able to display the profoundness of the most basic cultivation method. This kind of situation truly vividly displayed the mysteriousness of creation, causing Luo Fan to be unable to help but sigh inwardly. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about this, suddenly a ray of light descended from the sky, completely bypassing all of his defenses and even bypassing the completely independent dimension of heaven and earth that belonged to him, and directly rushed into his body. This sudden change made Luo Fan's heart tremble slightly. What is this? This thought flashed across his mind. With this thought in mind, he began to thoroughly examine his body. He meticulously studied what the light that had poured into his body just now was. As he thoroughly examined his body, all the internal conditions of his body appeared in his senses without reservation. After a while, he found out what the light that had appeared in his body was. It was a little bit of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. How can this be? Luo Fan was secretly shocked. This little bit of innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was even not inferior to that of this world. Those false sages who had achieved Tao through the mysteries of true sages, this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was not enough for Luo Fan to achieve true, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, and it could not even increase his strength by a little. However, it had indeed given him a little bit of innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. This little bit of innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was now directly attached to his life origin. If it was not for the fact that his life origin was extremely pure, to the point that no impurities or foreign objects could enter it, perhaps this little bit of innate, inextinguishable spiritual light would have already completely integrated with his life origin and his life origin. But even so, this bit of innate indestructibility continued to seep into his body. It was constantly approaching the depths of his origin of life, trying its best to truly become one with it. It would truly replace the essence of his life essence that truly belonged to him. That was the essence of the world of laws. That's right, Luo Fan's worldview had already occupied the most important key point in his life source. Although, there was still a long way to go before he could completely connect with his life origin and perfectly fuse with it. However, at least there was a start, and he was constantly transforming in that direction. Discovering that this foreign, innate, indestructible essence was challenging the position of his worldview, Luo Fan's heart moved without hesitation. A strand of will instantly descended upon the place where his life source was located, instantly wrapping around that innate, indestructible essence with the power of his will. He pulled it out of the place where the essence of life resided, then sealed it in a certain space-time within his body. Innate indestructibility was incredible. Although it was supreme and could even allow any living being to obtain the ability to freely travel and survive in a state of chaos. However, for Luo Fan, it was still far from being comparable to his worldview. For him, it was the worldview. It was the foundation of his cultivation, the key to his cultivation. Anything that challenged this position, even if it was the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, even if it was a true sage, he would never compromise after sealing that innate, indestructible essence into that space-time. Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief. I was almost contaminated. Such a thought flashed through his mind. After thinking about this, he began to search for the reason why this bit of innate, indestructible essence had descended upon his body. For the current Luo Fan, everything inside his body was under his perfect control. This included the endless space-time within his body. At this moment, with a thought, his will had already easily descended upon the space-time where the innate, indestructible essence was sealed. This space-time was extremely strange, with all kinds of strange lights and shadows, all kinds of strange creatures, and all kinds of strange space-time structures mixed together, forming a strange and unbelievable scene. In the center of this endless, unbelievable scene, the innate, indestructible essence that Luo Fan had just sealed in this space-time was like a sun, emitting endless light and heat, constantly illuminating the endless, unbelievable scene around it. In the process, these scenes were constantly changing, transforming these scenes in the direction of innate indestructibility. However, this space-time was the space-time within Luo Fan's body, and everything within it reflected a certain aspect of Luo Fan's body. Therefore, the changes to this space-time were like sprinkling some mixed materials at the end of a river. All changes could not last long, and they could not change the source of the river. In other words, it did not affect Luo Fan at all. Luo Fans will arrived here and looked at the sun that emitted endless light and heat. He frowned slightly. This innate, indestructible essence was extremely pure, and there was no information about why it had appeared here. With a thought, Luo Fans will instantly arrived above the innate, indestructible essence. He raised his hand and gently pressed down on the innate, indestructible essence. As his hand touched the innate, indestructible essence, a rumbling vibration that was deeply engraved in the depths of his life source spread out. This kind of vibration was like the sound of thunder to ordinary people. As it vibrated, Luo Fan felt that his life source was being cleansed, as if it was transforming in another direction. This might be a good thing for him. But at this moment, Luo Fan did not hesitate to release his will and completely suppress this inexplicable change in his life source. This caused his life source to return to its original state in the blink of an eye. It's actually going to erode again. As he thought of this, he looked at the innate, indestructible essence with an increasingly fearful gaze. At first glance, this feeling of his life source being cleansed seemed to be quite beneficial to him. But this was actually similar to when the innate, indestructible essence entered his life source. It was also changing the essence of his life and his life source. In the end, this innate, indestructible essence would completely replace his worldview of the laws. This was obviously something that Luo Fan could not accept. It was precisely because of this that he directly used his strong will to completely eliminate this change and completely cut off this rumbling vibration. Why did it appear in my body? Could it really be to change the essence of my existence, to assimilate my life source? Luo Fan thought. There was an inexplicable feeling in his heart that even if his guess was not correct, it would definitely not be too far from the truth. This was not difficult to deduce. The innate, indestructible spirit light had evolved on its own for such a long time. If it was said that it did not give birth to some will similar to the will of the world, Luo Fan would not believe it. And since it had given birth to a will, then the various concepts of survival, and strength naturally existed. And obviously, for the innate, indestructible spirit light, devouring other creatures and other powerhouses was one of its ways to survive and strengthen itself. Luo Fan had never belittled himself, but he knew very well that he was definitely a powerhouse. He could definitely be considered a powerhouse. If the innate, indestructible spirit light really had a will and devoured him, if it assimilated him, he would definitely be strengthened. From this aspect, the innate, indestructible spirit light clearly had the motive to assimilate him. After thinking clearly, Luo Fan sighed inwardly. Fortunately, he discovered the effect of this innate, indestructible spirit light. Otherwise, although he would not lose his life here, his future cultivation prospects, it would be worrisome. Thinking of this, he suddenly had some sympathy for the Broken Emperor. The Broken Emperor had stepped into these groups of worlds at the same time as him. Although they were not in the same world, the level of that world was not too far apart. Under such circumstances, it was very likely that he would trigger the innate indestructibility essence and be absorbed by it into his own life essence. And the Broken Emperor obviously could not have such a vigilant mind as Luo Fan did. Encountering this innate, indestructible spirit light, he would definitely be happy and excited. He might even think that he had found a way to completely refine this innate, indestructible spirit light and transfer it between different worlds, try hard to touch this characteristic of each world, and absorb this innate, indestructible spirit light into the depths of his life source. If that's the case, it'll be fun. Thinking of this, Luo Fan showed an expression of taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. If the Broken Emperor really did this, then it wouldn't be him refining the innate, indestructible spirit light, But the innate indestructible spirit light would refine him instead at that time. Not only would he not be able to completely control this innate indestructible spirit light, he might even be completely sealed in the worlds formed by this innate indestructible spirit light because of the assimilation of this innate indestructible spirit light, and would never be able to leave, staying there forever. Just as Luo Fan expected, not long after the Broken Emperor entered that world, because his understanding of this world had deepened to a certain level, he suddenly touched some kind of rule, causing a bit of innate indestructible spirit light to descend from that world, directly entering into the depths of the Broken Emperor's life source, and directly occupying the core of the Broken Emperor's life source. And just as Luo Fan had guessed, regarding such a change, the Broken Emperor did not see the kind of disadvantage at all. On the contrary, he was overjoyed. He could not help but have such a thought flashing through his mind. I actually waited until now to enter this world group. If I had entered earlier, perhaps I would have completely refined this innate indestructible spirit light by now. With this thought, his expression became increasingly unsightly. Not good. Right now, that fellow Taoist is also here. If I can receive this innate indestructible spirit light, then so can he. If I'm too slow, I'm afraid that he will refine this innate indestructible spirit light before me. If that's the case, it'll be terrible. With this thought, the Broken Emperor did not hesitate at all. With a shake of his body, he directly turned into a ray of light and soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he broke through the barrier of this world and directly appeared in the void outside this world. Immediately after, he rushed into another world without hesitation. Perhaps because his comprehension in the previous world had already reached the point where this world had bestowed him with innate indestructible spirit light, the moment he entered this world. That ray of innate indestructible spirit light directly entered his body, instantly penetrating through the layers of barriers. It had fused with his life essence. With the fusion of this innate indestructible spirit light, the Broken Emperor instantly felt that his connection with the surrounding world had become closer. He faintly felt that he did not need to use his own power, and could only rely on the most ordinary thoughts. Even the most ordinary thought could turn the entire world upside down. After discovering this, he was even more certain that this was the method to refine this innate indestructible spirit light. Therefore, without hesitation, he once again turned and rushed out of this world, entering another world. Just like that, one world after another, he plunged in, charged out, plunged in, and charged out. 10, 20, 30, 100, 200, 300, 1,000, 2,000 as the number of worlds he entered increased. The innate indestructible spirit light contained in his life force became more and more intense. In the end, when the number of worlds had reached hundreds of millions, that innate indestructible spirit light was already so intense that it completely filled his life force. It was even to the point where it had completely fused with his life force. Since the innate indestructible spirit light had been raised to this level, it was no longer shackled by his life force, nor was it shackled by his body. It began to slowly spread out, causing his whole body to be filled with this innate indestructible spirit light. Although he still felt that it was far from the real, innate, indestructible spirit light, but already had a bit of that aura. The next world should be the key. The Broken Emperor floated in the gap between the worlds. Looking at the world in front of him, such a thought flashed through his mind. At this time, because the innate, indestructible spirit light had become so intense, he had an inexplicable feeling that he had begun to control a large part of the worlds in this group of worlds. He could use all the rules and all the power of this world at will to achieve his own goal. Thus, even if he didn't need to use his own power or the spirit light in his body, he could still easily do as he pleased. This feeling told him that he was already on the right path to refine the whole innate indestructible spirit light. But why do I feel a little uneasy? Just as he was about to step into that world, the Broken Emperor felt an inexplicable uneasiness in his heart. This inexplicable uneasiness caused him to suddenly slow down his pace. His eyebrows furrowed slightly, showing a hesitation that hadn't appeared on him for a long time. The world in front of him happened to be the world where Luo Fan was, although it had been almost a year since then. But at this time, Luo Fan was still in this world and hadn't left. However, at this time, he was pretending to be an ordinary rogue cultivator, walking, training, and adventuring in this world. Compared to the broken emperor who was moving from world to world, this was almost two extremes. When the broken emperor came out of this world, Luo Fan, who was exploring a cave abode that was said to be built by an ancient god of creation, instantly sensed it. A woman beside Luo Fan saw that Luo Fan's expression had become a little strange, so she asked curiously, "Taoist Luo, do you feel something wrong?" Although the cultivation that Luo Fan displayed was the weakest among all the people present, and he intentionally restrained himself, his knowledge that far exceeded that of this world still made him behave differently from everyone else present. His casual guidance was insightful and insightful. His casual words might contain profound truths. His casual guidance might be the most rewarding part of the adventure. Yet, he had become the leader of this team of more than a dozen people. Everyone, even the cultivators who were much more powerful than what he displayed, had to listen to his instructions obediently. Just like the woman who was speaking now, her strength was equivalent to the peak of the quasi-sage realm. However, she was extremely respectful towards Luo Fan, whose strength was equivalent to that of an innate grand Luo realm cultivator. She didn't have the arrogance that came from seeing Luo Fan as an ant because of her strength. Nothing. I just suddenly thought of something. Hearing this, Luo Fan just smiled, put the matter of the broken emperor to the back of his mind, and continued to lead these cultivators on their adventures. The reason why Luo Fan chose this method to travel in this world was, of course, not because of his bad taste, but because, at this time, he was actually using his own personal cultivation method to understand the cultivation system of this world and to study what was contained in the cultivation system of this world. The profoundness of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Of course, the purpose of this personal cultivation was to understand the profoundness of the cultivation system. Naturally, Luo Fan didn't need to completely integrate this kind of cultivation with his body. Instead, he conveniently evolved an ordinary body of flesh and blood that belonged to this world to cultivate. The strength that his body was displaying now was the result of this flesh and blood body's cultivation over the past year to ordinary creatures in this world, cultivating from an ordinary person to the innate grand Luo realm in a year was naturally unimaginably fast, and it was enough to shock anyone. But for Luo Fan, it was really slow like a snail, especially when he had already put the world into his body when this body of flesh and blood was formed. It was even more so when he wanted to put the little bit of innate, inextinguishable essence that he had assimilated into this body of flesh and blood. The reason why it was so slow was naturally because of Luo Fan's control. Luo Fan cultivated the cultivation system of this world. It wasn't for the sake of obtaining powerful strength. The cultivation system of this world wasn't enough for him to obtain strength that surpassed his current strength. The reason why he cultivated this cultivation system was for research. Since it was for research, why did he have to be so fast? It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan slowed down the speed of his cultivation. According to the rules of this world, if I obtain the benefits from this cave, I will have to pay the price. He should be able to obtain 1,000 portions of this heaven and earth's karmic luck. The amount of providence will probably reach 1,500. If that's the case, I should have enough providence to enter a hidden path in the cultivation system. Luo Fan thought to himself as he continued to break the various restrictions on the cave abode with the others and went deeper into the cave abode. The entire process was so smooth that it didn't seem like he was adventuring. Instead, it was more like he had returned to his cave abode and was continuously walking towards the depths of his cave abode. It was also because of this calmness and smoothness that the surrounding cultivators couldn't help but look at him with admiration and fear. The reason why Luo Fan pursued the fortune of this world was because he had discovered this after personally cultivating the cultivation system of this world. In addition to the characteristics that Luo Fan had researched when he first entered this world, the cultivation system of this world had another characteristic. That was, under certain hidden conditions, any cultivation technique in this world might undergo some kind of mutation. Or, to be more specific, it would surpass it. Under this kind of surpassing, the cultivation technique would directly break through the restrictions of this world and transcend the shackles of this world. For example, if the cultivation technique that Luo Fan was cultivating with his current body of flesh and blood surpassed the shackles of this world, it would expand the original highest realm of this cultivation technique from a single world to a multiple world false saint. A single world false saint was naturally a world false saint. Such a false saint could only be considered a false saint in this world. After leaving this world, he would no longer be a false saint and would fall to the level of a false saint. However, a false saint with multiple worlds was different. A false saint with multiple worlds was a false saint with multiple worlds. Such a false saint would be a false saint as long as it was in the corresponding world. It would not be reduced to the level of an ordinary mortal just because it left a specific world. Such a change could almost be considered a change in essence. Chapter 1632. At this moment, the broken emperor finally stepped into this world. Because of what he had comprehended in the many worlds in the past, the innate indestructibility essence in him was so strong that he didn't need to comprehend anything to trigger the innate indestructibility essence that was bestowed to him by the worlds. Therefore, the moment he stepped into this world, the world itself emitted a beam of light towards him. At this moment, the broken emperor felt as if time had suddenly slowed down by billions of times. This beam of light, which had crossed an incomparably long distance in the blink of an eye and directly entered his body, approached him extremely slowly like a snail. At the very beginning, when he saw this beam of light, the broken emperor instinctively felt indescribable joy, because he saw an incomparably bright future. That future was enough to completely refine the entire innate spiritual light. However, after this joy, he soon felt an inexplicable uneasiness in his heart. This uneasiness was without any reason. Even he himself couldn't find the source of it. He only knew that this uneasiness suddenly emerged from the bottom of his heart, which even made his life origin slightly tremble at this moment. For the broken emperor, this sudden uneasiness wasn't strong, but it was enough to completely change his mentality. Plus Chong plus phone plus 1 plus X plus this is my instinctive feeling that something is wrong, so I feel uneasy. At this moment, such a thought flashed through his heart. No matter what, the broken emperor was an emperor who had surpassed the desperation realm. Such an existence's control over himself was no less than that of any other creatures. Even Luo Fan himself, compared to him, actually didn't have much of an advantage. Therefore, although he didn't know the source of this uneasiness, he clearly understood why it appeared. Therefore, although he didn't know the source of this uneasiness, he clearly understood why it appeared. Why do I suddenly feel uneasy? Such a thought echoed in the broken emperor's heart. With this thought, he looked at the beam of light that was approaching him like a snail, but he couldn't produce that inexplicable joy like before. With this thought in mind, he looked at the ray of light that was approaching him like a snail, but he could no longer feel the same inexplicable joy as before. In the end, he finally made a decision. With this decision, he suddenly felt that the uneasiness in his heart had suddenly weakened a little. He suddenly felt the uneasiness in his heart weaken a little. This change in feeling finally made him realize that his decision was correct. Naturally, he was even more resolute in his actions. His heart moved. A space-time appeared around his body. Instantly, it wrapped his body. This space-time was extremely strange and mysterious. It was filled with a kind of innate, indestructible essence that was guided from his life origin. This space-time was extremely strange and mysterious. It was filled with a kind of innate, indestructible essence that was guided from his origin of life. This space-time was extremely strange and mysterious. It was filled with a kind of innate, indestructible essence that was guided from his life origin. This space-time was no longer as powerless as before against that innate, indestructible essence. Because it had become homogeneous, it was like a palm that could grasp a solid object and could finally imprison this beam of light. With the formation of this world, that beam of light fiercely crashed into it. In an instant, an incomparably powerful force wrapped that beam of light. This power was of the same essence as the light. Under its wrapping, the light seemed to have turned into a real long sword, and its speed became slower and slower. In the end, under the effect of that power, it completely froze in the void. Along with this change, the space-time constructed by the Shatterer Emperor began to collapse, condense, and eventually turned into a seal, directly sealing the ray of light within it. Finally, it turned into a crystal ball, quietly lying on the palm of his hand. At this point, the broken Emperor felt that the uneasiness in his heart had completely disappeared. It seems that there are hidden dangers that I don't know about. However, after the uneasiness disappeared, the broken Emperor didn't look happy at all. On the contrary, his expression was extremely unsightly. He floated quietly in the void of this world, and his expression kept changing. He was an emperor, especially after integrating so many innate, indestructible essences. In this world formed by the innate, indestructible spiritual light, his strength was unimaginably powerful. Therefore, even though he was floating here casually, none of the false saints who had achieved sainthood through the true sage mysteries in this world discovered his existence. For those false saints, this world was still as normal as it had been countless years ago. After floating in the void for a while, the broken Emperor's expression changed. He began to search for Luo Fan in this world. Although he didn't see Luo Fan, he still remembered that when he first saw Luo Fan was in this world. And now, he had an inexplicable premonition that Luo Fan should still be in this world. This premonition was baseless, but he believed it very much. Especially at this time, when he could already feel that the innate, indestructible essence that had integrated into the depths of his life origin contained an inexplicable hidden danger, he was even more convinced of this. Ever since he met Luo Fan, everything that Luo Fan had done seemed to be under his control. This was especially so after he obtained the item that came from the chaos. Therefore, after guessing that there might be hidden dangers in his previous actions, he instinctively felt that Luo Fan wouldn't make the same mistake. In other words, Luo Fan might have an essential difference from his approach. At this time, he didn't leave this world at all. Maybe I should have a chat with that fellow Taoist, the broken Emperor thought. Naturally, he didn't think that his friendship with Luo Fan was so good that Luo Fan would give him pointers. He just felt that if there were any hidden dangers in his body, Luo Fan would never give up the opportunity to attack him, and it was very likely that Luo Fan would point out the hidden dangers in his body. It was precisely because of this thought that he planned to see Luo Fan at this time. However, it wasn't that easy to see Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan had completely concealed all the differences between him and the others. Moreover, he had his own independent world dimension that isolated him from the outside world. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for the broken Emperor to sense his existence. The broken Emperor pinched his hands and calculated in an incomparably meticulous manner. He felt that he had even calculated all the history of this world for billions of trillions of years since the birth of this world. However, in the end, he still couldn't figure out where Luo Fan was. Moreover, he couldn't sense the existence of Luo Fan at all. Sure enough, he's here. The broken Emperor wasn't disappointed in the slightest when he couldn't find any trace of Luo Fan. On the contrary, an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. He couldn't find any information. This was actually the biggest news. After all, if someone wanted to isolate his calculation and make him unable to calculate any information in this group of worlds formed by the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, only an emperor could do it. and Luo Fan, who was more powerful than him, could do it. Except for Luo Fan, no one else could do it. Even if all the people who became saints with the profound mysteries of true divinity combined, they couldn't resist his calculation. Under such circumstances, if Luo Fan had already left this world, with his deduction ability, even if he couldn't deduce what Luo Fan had done in this world, he would definitely be able to deduce traces of it from the various corresponding changes that happened afterwards. Now that he couldn't find any traces, the only possibility was that Luo Fan was still in this world and hadn't left. Knowing that Luo Fan hadn't left this world, the Broken Emperor was relieved. As long as he was in this world, he could definitely find him. Although this world seemed boundless in the eyes of ordinary creatures, and it was impossible to travel through it in billions of years, for existences like the Broken Emperor, it was only the size of a house. With such a size, it wasn't difficult to find a specific existence. With a thought, the Broken Emperor turned around and landed in the place where Luo Fan had been when he first met Luo Fan. It had already been a year since then. But in this world where ordinary people had a lifespan of hundreds or thousands of years, a year wasn't much longer than the blink of an eye. Therefore, this location had not changed at all compared to before. People leave traces. Even if that Taoist fellow wanted to eliminate everything, there must be some traces left by this world. As long as I can find these traces, I can find this Taoist fellow. With this thought in mind, the Broken Emperor also turned into an ordinary scholar and began to move around freely in this city. Compared to Luo Fan, the Broken Emperor didn't have an independent dimension of heaven and earth that belonged to him. However, he had an extremely strong, innate, indestructible essence. Although this innate, indestructible essence bound him to the world in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it also contained incredible power, making his power more than 100 times stronger in this world than in the outside world. With this kind of power, no matter what he did, he could completely isolate any other creatures in this world, including the perception of the false sage who had become a sage with the mystery of the true sage. The cultivation system of every world in this group of worlds is similar, and every one of them seems to contain the innate, indestructible essence. Casually sensing, it didn't take long for the Broken Emperor to completely grasp the cultivation system of this world and clearly understand the true mystery of the cultivation system in this world. If Luo Fan could do this, the Broken Emperor would naturally be able to do the same. The essence of this cultivation system might be profound and unfathomable for the false sages in this world, but for sovereigns like Luo Fan and the Broken Emperor, it was as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. As long as they thought about it carefully, they would naturally be able to understand it clearly. If I directly follow the cultivation system of this world and continue to improve and surpass, I might eventually be able to fuse with this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and refine this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light from another direction. As he carefully pondered about the cultivation system of this world, such a thought flashed through the Broken Emperor's mind. Of course, this thought only flashed through his mind for a moment. In theory, the cultivation system of this world indeed had the possibility of completely refining this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, but it was only in theory. To truly reach the point of completely refining this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, at the very least, he would need to surpass the cultivation system of this world a few hundred times. In other words, the pinnacle of the cultivation system of this world was the false sage who became a sage with the profound mysteries of true sage. If the Broken Emperor wanted to cultivate this cultivation system to the level where he could completely refine the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, he would need to break through this pinnacle and reach another pinnacle. Then, he would need to break through it again and reach a higher pinnacle. Only by doing this for hundreds of times in a row could he achieve it. According to the calculation of the realm, when he finally met the requirements, he would probably need to cultivate this world's cultivation system to a higher level than his current sovereign realm in order to be able to achieve it. This, compared to any other method, it was even more uncertain. If he could casually push any cultivation system to a higher level than his current realm, then why would he need to look for the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light? Wouldn't it be easier to directly push his own cultivation path to a higher level? Therefore, it could be said that this speculation, although it could also be regarded as a way to refine this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, but that was just an impractical method in essence. It could be said that there was not much meaning to it at all. After looking at it, the shattering emperor quickly put aside the cultivation system of this world. After putting this to one side, he began to calculate in detail. The previous calculations were just macroscopic calculations. Although there was no possibility of it being inaccurate, there was still a possibility of missing some small details. And such a weakness, if he was here now, he could make up for it with the help of the primer he had when he first met Luo Fan. In his calculation, there were endless scenes of all the small changes in this city in this 1 year in his mind. In a year's time, all the changes in a city, big and small, were very complicated. It was self-evident. However, such complicated changes didn't have any effect on the Broken Emperor. His eyes flickered slightly, and he had already locked on 3 figures. Among these 3 people, one of them is that fellow Taoist. The Broken Emperor looked at the 3 figures who had suddenly appeared 1 year ago and then disappeared not long after, thinking like this. When Luo Fan came to this world, unless he was completely invisible, he would inevitably come into contact with the creatures in this world and leave some traces in the process. And what the Broken Emperor was doing at this time was to find the existence of Luo Fan through these traces. Of course, it was impossible for him to find him based on his appearance. After all, he didn't believe that Luo Fan hadn't changed his appearance after locking onto 3 targets. The next thing was easy to do. The Broken Emperor's heart moved, and he increased the intensity of his deduction. In an instant, all the hidden secrets of the other 2 figures were deduced by him. 2 of them were the projections of 2 of the 18 false saints in this world. In fact, the Broken Emperor even deduced the reason why they came here. In the process of Luo Fan communicating with the Broken Emperor, these 2 false saints sensed an extremely special abnormality from the fluctuation of the origin of this world. Therefore, through this special abnormality, they found this city and sent their clones to search for it. After eliminating the existence of these 2 false saints, a smile appeared on the Broken Emperor's face. I found you. With this thought in mind, he began to walk out of the city. Even if he found the person and knew the appearance of Luo Fan, it was still impossible for him to directly deduce the location of Luo Fan. After all, Luo Fan himself had the completely independent protection of the dimension of heaven and earth. Unless the Broken Emperor was stronger than him, it would be impossible for him to deduce his existence. Therefore, at this time, he could only deduce the fate of other creatures and the little influence that Luo Fan's existence in this world had on this world to deduce the route that he might have taken back then. If Luo Fan focused his attention here at this time, he would definitely be able to discover that the route that the Broken Emperor was taking now was almost exactly the same as the one that he had taken back then. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan couldn't focus his attention on the Broken Emperor at this time. At this time, he had already led more than a dozen cultivators of this world and finally obtained the biggest benefit in the cave abode. The moment he obtained this benefit, he instantly felt it. A kind of fate that belonged to this world instantly blessed his body of flesh and blood. 1,500 portions of luck, finally in hand. When the luck was in hand, Luo Fan couldn't help but show an inexplicable smile on his face. 1,500 portions of luck might seem like a small amount, but that was only on the surface. In fact, the magnificence of these 1,500 portions of luck was absolutely earth-shattering. In fact, the legend of this world. But it wasn't groundless. This was a cave abode. Although it wasn't the cave abode of this world's divine demon, it wasn't far from it. It was actually the cave abode of the accompanying creatures of this world. In fact, any world would have accompanying creatures. For example, the accompanying creatures of the primeval world. even Hongjun, however. Usually, the accompanying creatures of a world might be some kind of spiritual root of heaven and earth or some magic treasure. After the world evolved creatures, they would become indistinguishable from all living things. As for this world, it was rather special. Its companion was a living creature. From the moment it was born, it had already obtained intelligence and comprehended an endless and unbelievable mysterious great Tao. In the end, it became a powerful living being that became a false saint. However, in the end, this living being failed in the process of breaking through to the false saint of this single world. That was why it died and left behind this cave abode. From the huge origin of this cave abode, it could be seen how great the benefits would be if one obtained this cave abode. In fact, although Luo Fan had only divided the luck he obtained from his flesh and blood body into 1,500 portions, each portion of luck was equivalent to all the luck of a true saint who had become a saint with the mysteries of a true saint. In other words, these 1,500 portions of luck were equivalent to all the luck of 1,500 false saints who had become saints with the mysteries of a true saint. After obtaining such a huge amount of luck, it instantly triggered a hidden change in the cultivation technique that Luo Fan had already deduced. In an instant, as the power in his body circulated, it had already turned into a brand new path. It vaguely gave off the feeling of transcending this world. I succeeded, Luo Fan thought to himself, although the current change was not too big. In fact, such a change already meant that he had already embarked on a bright path that led to the false saint of multiple worlds. The luck of these 1,500 false saints had clearly broken through the bottleneck of the false saint of a single world to the false saint of multiple worlds that had caused the companion creature of this world to die. In other words, as long as he cultivated this cultivation technique, he would continue to improve, sublimate, and break through. In the end, he would be able to break through the level of a false saint of a single world and become a false saint of multiple worlds. Of course, as for how many worlds there were, it would depend on how Luo Fan deduced and perfected this cultivation technique. Fellow Taoist Luo Fan, do you really not want these? At this moment, the woman beside Luo Fuan said in an extremely incredulous tone. The place she was pointing at was densely packed with Dharma treasures, densely packed pills, and densely packed ancient books. Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled and said, "There's no need. I've already gotten the most out of it." Even though Luo Fan had already established enough authority, the dozen or so cultivators still looked at Luo Fan as if he was a lunatic. None of them believed Luo Fan's words, or these in front of him. They were pseudo-primordial spiritual treasures. At that time, one was enough to allow a person to break through to any realm other than the false saint realm. It was a miraculous technique that could increase the chances of a person becoming a false saint by 3 to 5 times. They cannot even think of any benefits in this world that could compare to it other than directly allowing a person to become a false saint. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan suddenly said that he would give up these things, and even said that he had already obtained more benefits than this. How could they not think that Luo Fan had lost his mind? After all, the woman had a deeper relationship with Luo Fan. She immediately said, "You should wake up. If you miss this opportunity, it will be difficult for you to encounter it again for the rest of your life. Now is not the time to be polite." When Luo Fan heard this, he chuckled and turned to leave. He said leisurely, "There are some things you don't understand." As he said that, his body gradually disappeared in front of everyone. The woman stretched out her hand, wanting to persuade him again, but in the end, she sighed helplessly and ignored him. Fortuitous encounters could only be fought for and snatched by oneself. Taking the initiative to push away the fortuitous encounter that he had obtained was something that no one could help him with.